And you're watching TechStrong TV. Today is Thursday, November 12th. Just cruising right on through November here. We hope your week has been going well. It's been an interesting week, to say the least, in the U.S. Of course, around the world, including here in the U.S., the coronavirus numbers are exploding. We hope you're safe. We hope you're well and healthy. Let's hope there's light at the end of the tunnel soon for all of us as we muddle our way through this as a race, as a people. We have a great TechStrong TV show, though, for you today, and we hope you're going to find it very interesting. Should mention that two of the interviews today involved all-day DevOps presenters, including Nathan Harvey and Lance Knight. And today is all-day DevOps. It's been going on, I think, since last night. So if you get a chance, go check out All Day DevOps. It's a free registration with some great stuff there. My friends Derek Week and Mark Miller put it on. I think it's the third or fourth year. And check that out. And as I said, we do have some interviews there from today. But let me tell you what else we have in store. First of all, I'm really happy to have Sandy Carielli, Forrester analyst, join us today. Sandy recently did a new report on API security and some of the different aspects of it. And she's going to explain to us some of the findings, why it was important, and good stuff there. A good report. Then I'm joined by my friend Shlomi Ben-Chaim. Shlomi, of course, is CEO, co-founder at JFrog. And joining Shlomi and I today is Jacob Shulman, the CFO at JFrog. So if the CFO is joining, you can imagine what we're talking about. It's earnings season. JFrog recently reported their first quarter as a public entity. They were able to beat the street estimates, which means they usually get rewarded. And Shlomi and Jacob are going to talk to us a little bit about that. Then, as I mentioned, we do have the two all-day DevOps interviews. One is with Google developer advocate Nathan Harvey. Of course, Nathan, for many, many years, was with Chef as well, and he's been advocating for developers and DevOps, I think, ever since the term DevOps was first coined or thereabouts. Nathan's actually a pleasure, though, if you've ever had the chance to watch him present. He's going to talk a little bit about his ADDO presentation. And then Lance Knight, also with ConnectAll, but also with ADDO, is going to talk about his presentation as well. And Lance is another very accomplished person in the DevOps space. After that, we're going to turn things over to our editorial managing editor and chief content officer, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene's going to give us the news from around the DevOps world, around Container Journal, Security Boulevard, all the media ops site, as well as an update on webinars that we have going on this week. And then Charlene also has Charlene has two interviews today. One is with Kevin O'Brien, where she's going to discuss the results of a recent study from Greathorn that reveals the user's true competency in correctly identifying phishing email. And phishing is probably the easiest way into ransomware. And then we also have Will Bass from Flexinential, Vice President, Cybersecurity Services there, who's going to talk to Charlene. Charlene, after the webinar preview, though, I'll be back to turn things over from Charlene over to Mike Vizard, who has a double barrel for us of Channel Roundup. Michael's guests today are Palo Alto Networks' Mario Espinoza, Vice President of Data Protection and SaaS Security. And then from Fairwinds, I love the company Fairwinds. They do some great webinars with us if you ever get a chance to check them out. Mike talks to Sarah Zalachowski, Vice President of Engineering for Fairwinds, excuse me. And so two good ones from Mike. And then we'll head over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitch has also two great double-barrel interviews today. One is with Zetaset CEO Tim Riley about a new report that Accelerated Strategies actually did along with, sponsored by Zetaset, by analyst Charles Kalaji, who's part of the Accelerated Strategy Group team here. So stay tuned for that one. And then Mitchell also has another interview with Arshay Anand, product ambassador at Axelos, and David Crouch, advisory at Beyond 20 or an advisor at Beyond 20. And of course, Axlos are the people behind IDLE, the new IDLE 4, or recently new IDLE 4. Mitch has that all in there. And then I'll be back to wrap things up. It's a really another, we've just been, I can't tell you how proud I am of how things have been going at TechStrong TV. We've got some great content out there. Hope you're going to enjoy it. We're going to take a quick break right now with a commercial, and we'll be back with our first guest. Here we are now back for our TechStrong TV. As I mentioned, our first guest today is Forrester analyst Sandy Carielli. She's recently done a report on API security and various shades and aspects of it. And it's a good look at everything that's going in today as APIs become more and more used. You know, there's also issues around how we secure them. So here's Sandy Carielli from Forrester. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us on another segment here for TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment is Sandy Carielli of Forrester. Sandy, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks very much, Alan. Great to be here today.
Thank you. So our pleasure to have you here. So, Sandy, I mentioned you're from Forrester, but why don't you give people a little bit of your background and what you do at
Yeah,
Forrester,
absolutely.
what you're involved in? Great.
Yeah. So I am a principal analyst. I've been with Forrester for a little over a year, and I work on the security and risk team. My particular area of focus, my area of coverage is application security. And that includes a pretty wide range of technologies. It includes everything on pre-release testing as well as post-deployment protections and that DevSecOps relationship between development and security. One of the areas that I've been really interested in looking at in recent months has been API security because it's a newer method of development and it comes with its own set of security concerns that people need to consider and look at.
Absolutely. Well, look, there's a lot of people who say if it's not AppSec, it don't mean anything anymore. The whole world of security is kind of focused in on AppSec, and it's been like that for a couple of years. And, I'm old, so I probably have a contrarian view to that. I think, there are very important parts of security that aren't necessarily AppSec, but AppSec certainly has taken a major focus for us. And then, as you mentioned, API Sec, as they're calling it now, has really gotten so focused and hot. I've probably seen 2 or 3 startups in the last 2 or 3 months. That have raised money that are playing in there.
That certainly doesn't surprise me. And what you said about application security in general, what I'll tell you is that when organizations report breaches, applications are still the most common way in. So yes, there are other ways that, there's ransomware and there's other types of malware and there's identity issues, but applications are a very, very common way in for attackers. And APIs are, another way of building applications. But yes, you do see a lot out there.
Absolutely. And, I don't want to get into the COVID thing right now, but obviously with COVID, we've also seen a rise of, let's call it rapid application development.
Yes.
And maybe, I want to say rushing, but really pushing apps out because we're under the gun and we need these apps out. And maybe in doing so, we're cutting some corners, around security. That's not a new idea either. But it'll come back to bite you. Let's focus in on API security, though, if it's okay, Sandy. So, first of all, APIs have become ubiquitous.
They have.
Why?
Because APIs offer organizations a new way to reach their customers. Rather than just forcing everyone to go through the web interface, by putting out the APIs, you can actually enable your partners, you can enable external people to build new ways of interacting with you, of getting your data. And so it provides new customer experiences. And what that allows is faster development, more innovative development, and a new way of engaging. And in this era where you're constantly looking for new ways to delight your customers, leveraging APIs to find new ways to engage with the outside world is a great way to really expand your digital footprint and make your customers happy.
Yeah, and that's really the end of it. I'll propose another catalyst for API adoption, and that is so much of application development today, and not only application development, but when we're deploying it on Kubernetes, cloud native kind of infrastructures and so forth. So much of this is kind of modular, where rather than 100% native code in an application, a lot of it is, hey man, we're building blocks, right? And we're connecting one block, one module to the next. And oftentimes the way these blocks or modules communicate with each other is via API, right? Everything today. It's the first thing is, do you have an API, right? Does your functionality have an API so that I can plug it in?
That's a great point, because even when I assess other security tools and I look at pre-release testing or web application firewalls or anything else out there, having an API and a full API that covers all functionality that's available in, through the web application, having a full API at this point is table stakes.
Yeah.
Every vendor needs to have one.
It's expected, right? And so, and they're great. I mean, the one thing I don't want people to get out of this interview, Sandy, is that somehow APIs are bad or a security risk or that we shouldn't be using them. APIs have enabled an explosion of interactivity, of things being so much easier to glue stuff together, right? And make stuff happen. But on the other hand, they do represent a potential security surface, an attack surface, if we can call it that. Is fair?
Yeah, the danger, Alan, is that you can't assume that the same old application security issues you've had to protect against for years will suddenly go away if you use APIs. All of those things that you had to protect against in terms of authentication and authorization and preventing, code injection and all of those issues, they're still, APIs don't make that irrelevant. You still have to protect against those issues. And because the architectures are slightly different, you have to protect against them slightly differently than you used to. So there's a bit of a learning experience. You can't assume that, and this is something where we keep relearning this lesson over and over and over again with every new architecture, with every new deployment model. It's always, oh, right, we still have to secure it. So think about APIs in that context. It's a new way of building software. It's, as you say, an incredibly powerful way of building software, a way that enables a lot of businesses. So it is a very positive thing, but you can't forget the security side.
Agreed. So I think we've set our table, Sandy. Talk to us. You've got a new report on API security.
I do. And, this is a report we've been working on. I started working on this back in the spring. So this has been a long time coming. And, what was driving it, pretty much every week, you will read about some new API related breach, some sort of issue. It can be, common ones might be an API that was left exposed and you can find customer transaction data by sending a function. Or there was an issue, you were talking about COVID earlier, an issue with a couple of the contact tracing COVID tracking applications that were built, as you said, probably very quickly, leveraged APIs, and they weren't doing the proper authorization checks and access controls so that somebody on the other side of the world could actually determine the COVID status of anyone in India down to the household, because they were able to get past the geographic limiters. And so that was an issue with India's COVID tracking app. And, there's was an issue with Xiaomi pet food feeders, where the APIs were left exposed and you could change the feeding schedule of someone else's pet. It sounds kind of silly, right? But all these ways in which if APIs are not tracked, if the permissions aren't managed, if you're not controlling the parameters, just like we learned with regular web applications 20 years ago, attackers can introduce other ways in. And that's what drove the report to begin with. So what we started to look at is, okay, what is the set? Knowing that those are some of the issues out there, that APIs are subject to many of those same issues as web applications, but they're also subject to additional or slightly different issues. Knowing that API discovery is still a huge problem, that a lot of organizations don't necessarily know the full set of APIs in their environment. And like everything else, that can make it hard to protect. What are the options for security professionals? What are the different tools that are out there? What are the best ways to approach this? When you really have to look at APIs, because it's another way of building an application, it's not just a single tool. So you're not going to protect it by, there are API security tools out there and they solve part of the problem. But you also need the rest of your security tooling to be able to, for lack of a better way, speak API, be able to support APIs in their tooling. You need to be able to do pre-release testing on APIs. You need your web application firewall to be able to understand and, if necessary, block API calls. Same with your bot management. All of these tools need to be able to handle APIs as well. So it's a bit of a complex problem.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So I mentioned Kubernetes Cloud Native earlier, right? And we see APIs, especially around like service mesh, for instance, right? I think one of the, and you mentioned it too, that you can't forget everything we've learned about basic security in AppSec over the last 20 years now when we apply to APIs. But concepts like zero trust, for instance, right? There's no reason we can't carry zero trust over to our API security kind of profile and postures as well. No,
you're absolutely right, Alan. Yes. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot when I look at the range of tooling available, you start to get into application microsegmentation tooling, which, similar to what you were talking about with respect to container security tooling, it's about separation. It's about really limiting the context of any container or API or serverless function or anything to, a much smaller context. And think of application microsegmentation as one really critical step in zero trust at the app level. We talk a lot about zero trust at the network level or at the identity level, but zero trust at the application level is just as important here. And so, yes, the microsegmentation really feeds well into the zero trust story.
Sure does. Sure does. There's also, just like there are, I don't want to use the word silos because we're DevOps.com and we stay away from silos too, Sandy. But just as there are segments in AppSec, right? You alluded to them earlier. There are certainly segments that we're seeing develop within the larger API security market, right?
Yes.
We can focus in on API gateways. We can focus on API management. But that's not all. There are others. Microsegmentation, another one that you brought up. So let's say I'm an enterprise out there and I say, okay, API security is important. Is this going to be sort of a Tower of Babel in terms of dealing with different vendors? Do I need 12 different vendors for API security, or do you think it consolidates? What do you think?
Well, it can be a bit of a patchwork right now. And you have to look at API security a couple of ways. You have to look at it from development through to deployment. So from that standpoint, but also at the production level from end user all the way through back end. So how are you managing and protecting your APIs during the software development lifecycle, but also how are you protecting it at each stage of of the API, being sent and API calls being made and all of that. There's not a single API security tool. So from that standpoint, I wish I could tell you you're going to get one vendor for, that will handle all of that. There are API security vendors out there that address certain aspects of this. But the other piece of it is take a look at what you already, at what you already have. You probably already have some pre-release testing tools. You probably already have a web application firewall. You probably already have an API gateway. Yeah. So then the key is to go back to those vendors and figure out what they offer in terms of API security. And each of them offers something slightly different. And the maturity varies even within each market. Every WAF doesn't protect APIs the same way at this point. So as a security professional, what you really need to do is go back to your existing vendors, understand what they have, and how that's going to protect your APIs. And then ask yourself two questions. What gaps do I have? One. What overlaps do I have? Two. You may find that you have multiple types of tooling that are handling OAuth, that are handling authentication that you might be using for your APIs. And then it's a question of, where is it in place and where should you be using it? On the other hand, you may also find that you don't have anything right now that is serving to validate API calls based on knowledge of their parameters, based on knowledge of the configuration and the specification. So that's the other piece of it. So yeah, it's not an easy answer. It's knowing what you have.
Do you think that's a reflection on the maturity of the API security market itself, or more just to the complexity of the problem, or a little of both?
Probably some of each, honestly. API security is still an emerging space. It is not fully mature. It is considered very high value. I would say of the technologies that I cover at Forrester, it is one of the ones that I get the most questions about, that organizations, when I survey them, they're doing the most with, they see the most value in. There's a lot of passion around this and a lot of realization that we need this. So there's definitely some maturing to do. And over time, I think some of this, Alan, will settle out in terms of which tools address which requirements. So there is that piece of it. But yeah, there is, there is also the question of, how this is all going to fit together.
Yeah. I think we'll have to see that. Sandy, if you don't mind, I'm going to lift us out of the weeds of the technical.
Yes,
stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the report. So, obviously there was some surveys done. You spoke to a bunch of people. What were kind of the demographics here of the people you spoke to?
So for this report, we didn't, this was less survey driven. What I actually ended up doing, I spoke to a lot of the vendors that were addressing API security in different ways. We looked at API gateway, API management vendors who address this from one perspective, and they're, traditionally much more developer driven. And so they bring one perspective into it. We spoke to web application firewall vendors. We spoke to bot management vendors. We tried to get the range. We spoke to some API security specialists as well. And we often started with, okay, so what are your customers asking you for first? Want to guess the number one answer? The first thing that is of concern? Discovery.
Really?
Organizations.
I wouldn't guess that.
Organizations don't know what APIs exist in their environment. And the risks from rogue APIs, from unprotected APIs is so great that there's a real need to get a handle around that. So many of these vendors were telling me that the first thing they have to solve for their problems is that inventory question. What do we have? That is the first thing. So yeah, that's how that approached.
I have a comment on that. So it's interesting because I wouldn't have guessed that, Sandy. But on the other hand, I've seen such an explosion of security tools in general, not just for API, around discovery. Organizations want to know what they have, and not just APIs. What do I have in the cloud? What instances do I have in the cloud? What endpoint devices are on my network? What devices come on and off my network? right? Where is my storage? I mean, it's a real problem. So I think when you look at it in that context, well, yeah, gee, it's logical then that I'd want to know what APIs I got out that are hanging out there too, because I guess what it really says is organizations want to know what's their attack surface.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it, Alan. You've really hit the nail on the head. And if you go back in time, think about all of the other ways in which discovery and inventory has been a huge issue. Inventory of source code, inventory of encryption keys, inventory of certificates, inventory of identities. It's always a discovery problem.
Yeah.
Always, always, always. So in some ways, it's surprising and yet it's not, right?
Yeah, no, that, in that context, it makes sense. And then the other thing we see is, ways of doing inventory. One is kind of the outside looking in model, right? So what do I see? What do you expose? And the other is inside looking out. Here's what here's how we kind of see everything from within our own network. But anyway, Sandy, we're running low on time. I wanted to get people, for anyone interested in maybe downloading or having a look at the report or the summaries or anything like that, where can they get more information?
Yeah, so two things actually. One, you can, if you're a Forrester customer, you can download the report at Forrester.com. And it should be out there on the website. Also, we are doing a webinar based on the content in the report in early December, December 8th, I believe. And I and my co-author, David Muda, are going to walk through some of what you and I have talked about. What are the big challenges with respect to API security? What are the tools that are out there? What do you need to consider in terms of design through deployment and end user through backend? How does this all fit together? And what can you do as a security pro to make your life easier? So two different ways you can engage. And we also put out a blog on Forrester.com a couple of weeks ago on the same topic.
The webinar is open to anyone or just Forrester customers?
Forrester customers.
Okay. And you can get that information also on Forrester.com.
Yes. If you go to Forrester.com and you look at events and upcoming webinars, we're there. The blog, anyone can take a look at. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. David and I went through and tried to put some high-level thoughts together that could be relevant for everyone. So I hope you all enjoy it.
Very cool. Sandy, thanks so much for coming and spending a little time with us here on TechStrong TV. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me.
Our pleasure. Sandy Carielli, Forrester, new report on API security. Go check that out. Come back and see us again.
Will do. Thank you.
All righty. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with another guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Living the dream of being a public company means that you got to report your earnings every quarter, and you can be rewarded or slapped down because of it. JFrog recently reported their first quarter as a public entity, and happy to report they beat the street estimates. Shlomi Ben Chaim, CEO, co-founder, and Jacob Shulman, CFO of JFrog, join us now to discuss this first quarter's results, what was behind it, and what we can expect going forward. So here's my interview with Jacob Shulman and Shlomi Ben Chaim.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another TechStrong TV episode. We're happy to be joined by my friend Shlomi Ben Chaim. Shlomi, of course, is CEO, co-founder at JFrog. Shlomi, welcome.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And then joining Shlomi and I, a newcomer to our show, is Jacob Schulman. Jacob is the CFO at JFrog. Jacob, welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So if we got the CFO here, we're talking money. And of course, just this, JFrog just announced, I guess it was last week, their first quarter as a public company, and it was well received from what I saw on the street. But let's talk a little about it. I mean, I remember doing this in the year 2000 in the .com days, our first quarter, and doing the whole dog and pony show around it. But Jacob, I'm going to ask you as the CFO, how was it? How did it go? Was it what you expected? Lessons learned? What did you think?
Yeah, first of all, it's an amazing experience. The IPO process and the earnings call, all virtual, right? So software becoming an integral part of our life. We didn't have to travel at all, and we had tremendous acceptance by the Wall Street of the company, our value proposition, and our prospects. We play in a very big market, and our platform is very mission critical to any software company and any company in the world.
Yeah. Shlomi, how was it for you? I guess it is virtual. It's not quite the same as being in Wall Street necessarily, but doing an earnings call is it's stressful. You got to rehearse and have your
Alan, we know each other for a long time, and I just thought about it while you were talking with Jacob, that last I met you, we were a private company, and now we are a public company, and it's a big milestone for the frogs, and you know us since we were 100 employees, and build the company and build the domain and the category together with the community, and we are very honored to be the first core DevOps company that went public. As Jacob mentioned, it was received very well. In a world that you order your food with software, and your IPO is digitalized, and your roadshow and your earnings call is all powered by software, I think that liquid software might be our vision, but it became the world's mission. So we are very honored and very excited about what we have next.
Sure. So I guess we should mention though a little bit. So what were earnings like for the quarter? Jacob, I'm going to ask you, like, what was estimated, projected? What did you come in at, and how do you think it bodes going forward?
Yeah, we reported very good results. 40% year-over-year growth in our revenues, 13% operating margin. Very nice gross margin, so we exceeded Wall Street expectations, and good. We also guided higher than analyst consensus. So beat and raise in its performance.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about going public is there's really no hiding, right? There's no place to hide financial performance anyway. But an interesting fact I picked up in looking at everything is that JFrog has been cash flow positive, right, for about 5 years now. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think that's an important thing. Look, most of our audience are not financial experts. They're developers. They're people who use JFrog. They're not maybe as concerned about the JFrog finances, as long as they know they're not going out of business. But the fact is, in a world of venture-backed companies, and let's face it, 95%, 98% of the companies our audience is dealing with are venture-backed startups, right? To say that you're free cash flow positive is, forget going public even for a second, just to be profitable and cash flow positive is quite an accomplishment, right? You probably disqualified 95% of the companies that are out here right now.
I will maybe point it from the CEO side, and then Jacob obviously will speak about the how resilient the business is when you own your own destiny, when you control your own destiny, and going with a free cash flow positive position to the market. I'll tell you one thing, Alan, and the community knows us very well. Having the privilege of leading a company that can contribute back to the community, that can deploy its own capital to its growth. And I'll give you just one example, and a lot of analysts cover it in the last week earnings. We decided that we are going with a free tier, allowing everyone in the world to use the JFrog platform, the end-to-end DevOps solution that is universal and it's hybrid and it's multi-cloud, to provide it for free with the free tier for everyone in the world. Now, not just having all the products on a one free tier platform in the cloud, but also allowing you to provision it on AWS or Azure or GCP, and not just that, on 25 different regions. This is the power of a company with a clear path to profitability. We can use our funds and deploy it back to the company and create a better engagement with the community. Now, why this is important for the company? I understand why it's important for the user. DevOps engineer, especially in COVID days, you don't have maybe the budget or the access to infrastructure, and boom, you get it all from JFrog, a universal hybrid end-to-end solution. But it's also important for the company, because if we wouldn't be able to deploy this capital and offer the all end-to-end solution and not one-by-one trial per product, then obviously I'm missing the opportunity to introduce the world with our innovation and our products. It takes a lot of efforts and investment, and it's not just the hosting cost, it's everything around it, including support and everything that we invest. And this is, for me, a better engagement with the community. This is, for me, a commitment to my customers that they have a free trial, a free ride, without any sales and marketing intervention. You know us, Alan, one of the reasons that we are cash flow positive is the fact that we don't have even one direct field sales in the field. Our products are not being sold, they are being bought. And we are very honored. And I think that if you build a business that way, it gives you a lot of room to give back.
You know, it's actually, Shlomi, we actually interviewed Stephen Chin when the free tier came out.
Right.
And it's not just that it's a trial, right? One way of looking at it a trial is it is a trial, but it's also free forever, right? So if you're going to stay at that tier, it's free forever. And look, you talk about not having sales. You know, I'll say it here in front of everyone, on whoever's the 9 or 10,000 people who watch this. You know, I've been talking for the last year about the rise of the, you know, that the builder shall inherit the earth, the democratization of IT. And truth be told, I stole it from you, right? I was at a, I was at a, I forgot where we were with the airplanes or wherever it was at one of the events. And you actually, you know, I've maybe expanded since then on it, but you gave me that nugget of this idea of there's a new era. We don't need enterprise salespeople taking the CTO out or CIO out for dinner and martinis, right? No, we want to, right?
You know, I like martini, and it's great any now and then to have one, but with not, if you have it with your friends, not with the goal of signing a deal, it's long gone. Enterprise 4.0 looks at the low touch, self-service. Let me try it. Don't send your army of marketing and salespeople after me. If I like it, I will become your champion. If I don't, then you should go and improve your products. And this is what we did for the past 12 years. The democracy of developers is growing. These are the rainmakers of the world. And companies and enterprise that will fail to understand that will fall behind.
Agreed. Let me bring it back because we've got Jacob here. We got to take advantage of it. You know, Jacob, I helped do a IPO and manage a public company back in the .com days. And one of the, I'll be honest with you, left a very bad taste in my mouth because we wound up managing quarter to quarter instead of, but we didn't have the free cash flow. We were burning cash like it was the dot-com days. And so, you know, quarter to quarter, it was like driving a sailboat like this, when the straightest line between 2 points, I mean, the shortest line between 2 points is a straight line, but we're driving whatever the market's telling us we should be doing. And it really messed up what was a good, we went through about $500 million. So now you got a quarter under your belt, the market's patting you on the back. From a CFO perspective, and then Shlomi, to you as a CEO, how do you avoid giving in to that, you should do this, you should do that, when you know you have your vision?
Yeah, Shlomi, I'll start and then you join. So we as a company, we define our strategy, which is a long-term strategy, and we pursue the strategy. However, sometimes we need to adjust ourselves to the market needs. For example, as COVID happened, we did make some adjustments to our products to allow our customers better work from home environments. So sometimes you do need to take those sideways steps to better align with the market requirement. But North Point is still the same: how to provide developers and organizations better DevOps experience, and how to improve their software release management process.
Shlomi?
Well, first, I'm listening to my CFO speaking about bottoms up and developers and wearing a T-shirt, and you will not find a CFO that is so technical as our Jacob. Half of the company don't call him Jacob anymore; they call him JFrog. So
yeah, all right.
I'll tell you one thing, Alan. It's been a long journey for the frogs, and every leap that we've done was a leap forward and another value that we provided to the market. We started with a repository with Artifactory, then X-Ray for security, then JFrog distribution for software package distribution. But we will always focus on two things. Number one, hearing and listening well to what the community have to say about our products. And number two is to stay aligned with our philosophy that the primary asset in the DevOps pipeline is software packages and binaries. And this keeps us focused. We can do thousands of things around that. We can do a source code repository, or we can do all kind of cybersecurity, and you can connect all the dots if you really want on a philosophical level. But our expertise is the 0 and 1. We are the binaries people. And since the software packages are exploding because of microservices and open source and containers, everybody creates and consumes millions of software packages a day. JFrog built the full business around it, and DevOps happened. DevOps is fueled by software packages, and we are very focused there and expanding our portfolio on the other hand.
Let's follow up on that, and then we probably got to be thinking of wrapping up. So, as I said earlier, our audience is not CFOs, right? They're very happy to see JFrog's success because JFrog's success is the industry's success. And quite frankly, most of our audience says the free tier is nice, but our organization needs more, right? Needs more than the free tier. We're a paying customer. What is this earnings season? What does, over the last quarter or so that JFrog's now public, what does it mean for those people? What can they expect to see a benefit, better product, better something? How is it going to help them? Shlomi?
Yes. So, Alan, you know that part of our product philosophy is the freedom of choice. This is why universality matters to us. Freedom of choice of developers goes everywhere. It goes to the infrastructure for deployment environment. It's the software packages that we support. It's the integration with their ecosystem. Our commitment to them is that our tools will work with whatever you feel comfortable and your organization needs. But what we started to see is that it's also very important to have this flexibility at the enterprise. No one just wants to be a cloud a company. I'm talking about the Fortune 100, Fortune 1000. They all speak about hybrid. They speak about the flexibility of creating a hybrid environment, a multi-cloud environment, a multi-region environment, consolidating the repositories and not having a repository per package. And we are very honored to see that other players in the market are following this philosophy. What we pitched 8 and 10 years ago started to be the mainstream. And what the world should expect coming from JFrog is more security capabilities with X-ray expanded to the right, supporting the software packages all the way to the edge. What the world should expect is a better and stronger software package distribution. We just released the peer-to-peer that not just create the circle of trust for your software packages all the way from Artifactory through X-ray to JFrog distribution, but also ease the stress on the network. We are very minded to how can we make the developer the champion of the organization, because DevOps is happening. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Sure. Hey, we've got to bang off, but Shlomi and Jacob, I know you guys, don't you have a virtual event on financials coming up soon? No, on the financial sector?
We did an automotive DevOps summit. It was wonderful, very focused, great companies like Volvo, Toyota, Daimler, and others. We had the DevOps summit for FinTech. Alan, the top 10 banks of the world were in our panel.
I saw how did they go?
It was amazing. And just coming up, the first ever DevOps summit in the cloud. We are doing one day with AWS, one day with Microsoft Azure, and one day with Google Cloud. All of them are great partners of ours. All of them are very active in the community. And this is the first DevOps summit that is dedicated to the cloud one by one. So stay tuned. It's coming soon.
Fantastic. Shlomi, always a pleasure seeing you. Jacob, very nice meeting you. Congratulations on your first quarter out there in the public. Here's to many, many more and good ones. We'll speak to you soon. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We'll be right back with our next guest.
As I mentioned, today is All Day DevOps. If you go to alldaydevops.com or ADDO.com, I believe, you can join in all the fun there for free. It's been going on all day. But we have 2 interviews we did with some of the ADDO folks. One is Nathan Harvey of Google, and the other is Lance Knight from ConnectAll. 2 great speakers from ADDO and just great speakers in general in the DevOps space. Let's go to these 2 interviews, and do check out All Day DevOps today.
Hi, this is Mark Miller, co-founder of All Day DevOps, and I'm here with Nathan Harvey from Google. Nathan, always good to see you.
Mark, good to see you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing really well. All Day DevOps is coming. We busted 16,000 registrations yesterday.
My goodness. My goodness. And congratulations. 5th year anniversary, right?
Oh, thank you. Yes, yes. It's, the purpose of this too is to say thank you, because Google is actually sponsoring this year, led by you. Thank you for actually putting us in front. For people that don't know you, Nathan, what is a developer advocate? Because that's your role at Google.
Yes, I am a developer advocate at Google, and my the role of a developer advocate is to go out into the world and help our customers, help our community understand and put into place the principles, practices, and technologies around, well, in my case, DevOps and site reliability engineering.
Right, and that leads directly into why you wanted to participate in All Day DevOps, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, I've been a speaker at All Day DevOps. I've been involved and a participant from the beginning. And so I love this conference. And so when it pops up every year, there's no question I'm coming back.
It's funny, you and I were talking before we started recording, and you said, it's November, it's time for All Day DevOps.
That's it. That's it. Yep. Every year, there's going to be a big conference. It's going to be online, and it's going to be all day. Now, 2020 changes that. Lots of conferences have been online, right. But All Day DevOps still is kind of that shining light that we look forward to each year.
The interesting thing too is Ben and Jennifer are doing the keynote Ask Me Anything about SRE, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And I think that, when we talk about DevOps and site reliability engineering, look, at the end of the day, it's all about how do we leverage technology to drive our businesses forward? And how do we all, as a team and an organization, come together and drive towards those same outcomes? And so it's really fun for me to observe as this community is kind of bringing those two things together, the practice of site reliability engineering, the practice of DevOps.
One of the things that a lot of people are thinking about too right now, Nathan, is the idea of the work at home. I mean, you're working from home now, I'm at home. How has this affected the work environment at Google in general?
Man, it has definitely had tremendous impact. And in fact, we even have a couple of speakers during All Day DevOps that are going to talk about some of that. So Ramon is going to talk about a story of contingency plans for COVID-19. I think we also have someone else who's going to talk about scaling up Meet. Obviously Google has a Meet platform, and how have we responded to the pandemic during that? Because obviously our business has changed. Lots of people are now meeting online, but obviously it's also had tremendous impact on our employees. Many Googlers in the before time, if you will, met in the office, and now we're all completely distributed.
What has it done for hiring at Google? Are you guys still hiring?
Oh my goodness, yes, absolutely. And speaking of hiring, like obviously we're still hiring, but there's it really has changed the onboarding process as well. And so really having to be very mindful and thoughtful about how do you onboard a new employee when you can't bring 100 new employees together for a new employee orientation in the same physical space.
How are you doing it? I mean, is it just a gigantic Zoom meeting or?
Well, of course we'll use Meet, not Zoom, because we're Google, but yes, we do a ton of online. And the good thing is we're very fortunate that we had the infrastructure in place. Although you were meeting in person before, everything you were doing was essentially online. So that makes it a little bit easier, but man, the human connection that you get, I know everyone out there is missing that today.
We're actually going to do something different this year. I don't even know if I've told you yet. On breaks, we're going to play code names. On break, we've got an online version, and anybody can jump in, put a team together. There's got to be a way, as you say, to get that personal connection back, that whole idea of just getting together, having a beer, getting a cup of tea. And so we're going to try to do some new stuff like that. I hope you jump in on the breaks to see what's going on.
That sounds great. I mean, that is obviously the part that we all miss most of conferences.
Yeah. The thing about All Day DevOps is it's so large, as far 180 people from around the world. When you looked at the agenda and you saw what was going on, what is exciting you the most about this year's agenda?
Look, it's always the talks, obviously. But one of the other things that I find really fascinating is like your top 20 leaderboards, where we have these organizations that are coming together and saying, hey, listen, All Day DevOps isn't for me. It's for us. It's for all of us. So I think State Farm is one of your top companies that they're going to tune in and have a tremendous viewership of these talks. And I think the beauty of All Day DevOps really is that we bring this global community together. But the global community also happens locally. So what is the community of practice around DevOps within your organization? Bringing them along to All Day DevOps, that to me is really tremendous.
I think an extension of that, which was organic, it's nothing that Derek and I did, is the viewing party concept. We found that people were getting entire teams together to sit around a conference table and look at sessions. We found Ross Clanton, when he was with Verizon, he's with American Airlines now, but Ross closed down all the dojos at Verizon and said they're open for All Day DevOps.
Yes.
We weren't aware that was going on until people just told us.
And Mark, I have a challenge for all of those companies that are tuning in together. I want to challenge them as they convene and watch these talks. And really it's for everyone, not just for those companies. I want them to consider, as they're listening to the talks, what are you going to do tomorrow? right? You come to All Day DevOps and you get inspired. You learn new ideas. How are you going to take those ideas and put them into practice tomorrow, next week, within your organization? So if you're having a viewing party, if you're gathering your local community, if you're gathering with your coworkers, put that on the board. Think about that as you're listening to and participating in the conference, because that's how we're all going to improve as an industry.
It's you're right on the money there. It's like that's when I'm talking to people specifically, that's the first thing I say is have a notebook and pen in your lap. And when you hear something that triggers you, what is that going to do to encourage you tomorrow? Because that's when it's going to happen. A week after All Day DevOps, it's all going to be gone.
Right, right. So book time in your calendar now. Book time capacity in your backlog right now. Set aside capacity for, these are the things, this is the time we're going to spend based on the things we learned at All Day DevOps.
It's fascinating to the viewing party concept itself. The idea of being in physical proximity of each other was great. But
Yes.
how are you going to do a viewing party in a virtual environment? We actually have a guideline sheet available for people that want to do virtual viewing parties. I talked to Mark Cluett and Dominique in London last week. They are actually working on a solution to do it on Discord. You know Discord.
Oh
right?
yeah, of course.
So they've actually set that up so that they can actually do a viewing party on Discord and have
I love that.
verbal communications with their team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that's exciting because now we're starting to find new ways to use the technology, the same technology we've always had, in a new way to get the virtual and remote groups together.
I love it.
It's astonishing. So thank you so much. Thanks you. Thanks to Google, all the team that's been behind this and supporting what we're doing. We're looking at November 12th. And then we're looking at, we'll be over 20 or 30,000 people joining us, and very, very happy and proud to have your support. Thank you.
Mark, thank you. Thanks to you, Derek, and the entire team behind All Day DevOps. We're really excited to be a proud sponsor of the conference. And I tell you what, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. I'll see you November 12th.
Sounds good.
Hi, Mark Miller, co-founder of All Day DevOps here in the All Day DevOps studio, as you can see behind me. Today, I'm talking with Lance Knight, who is the CEO of ConnectAll. Welcome, Lance.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm the COO, just so that my CEO doesn't come.
Did I say CEO?
Yeah.
Moving on the way up. Where are you physically?
So I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, in Cumming, Georgia. Our company is a Georgia-based company, and I'm here in my remote studio, broadcasting
noticing
directly
the
from
light panels. Yeah, you got nice lighting panels behind you. When people think about you and ConnectAll, what do you, for those who haven't heard of you before, what do you guys do?
So ConnectAll is a value stream management and a value stream integration company. So we integrate all the tools and all of the things that you use to develop software, all the way from OKRs, initiatives, all the way down into code and production. We connect all of the monitoring tools, all the DevOps tools, all of that to improve flow in software delivery. And we do that by just generally connecting it. So we do really, really well. We're dedicated to helping companies to achieve better levels of velocity, predictability, and so on in their software delivery systems. And we do that by connecting people, processes, and tools. And we have a set of products which help you do that, which is ConnectAll Integration Hub and ConnectAll Insights, which provides all the lean flow metrics and all of that across your software delivery system, from lead time to throughput. And we also provide visibility from understanding things like audits and hierarchies, and seeing all of that through your total software delivery lifecycle.
Is it an automated platform on premises or in the cloud? How do people use it?
So it's all of the above, right? You can go and sign up for our SaaS version of it. We can install it in your environment, and you just get it set up and running, and you can connect to almost any tool. We have an adapter that lets us connect to all of the DevOps tools. Pretty straightforward. We call it our universal adapter. And that becomes really important when you're trying to really get good visibility into your software delivery, to get feedback loops back into software delivery. So all of this is a part of how ConnectAll works and operates. And geez, this year we've just had great success. I think everybody was kind of like, oh, look, there's ConnectAll in this space. So
yeah.
And we've been doing it for a while, and we finally put it all together to be, one of the premier value stream management and value stream integration companies out there today. Did really well in Forrester Wave, and we're in Gartner now, and all those other things too.
As I'm trying to visualize it, is it like a centralized dashboard so that you can see everything in one place?
Yeah, so that's one piece of it. We call that ConnectAll Insights, and that lets you have a dashboard. It's our analytics play that you can fill our common data model with all of this information flowing through your value stream, no matter what the piece of, whether that's planning tools and so on. And when you think about value stream management flows, as well as how the code flows into production. So yeah, it's this beautiful dashboard that shows you, your OKR or your objective in your OKR, and you can see it connect all the way down in the dashboard to the code that's in production that represents that OKR.
When I think about value stream mapping, I think almost of a mid-level to a mature company that's just trying to visualize their processes. Have I got that right?
Yeah, so it's going to be a mid-level to mature. So if you're a younger company, the cool part is you can design your value stream, but the bigger you get, the more out of control that gets, right? The more code lines, and then the more things move in and out of production. There's more people working on things. So you need to be able to visualize the value stream and then automate it, and then be able to take measurements through it as well. And the ConnectAll gives you that piece. Value stream management, the field that's been uncovered, is actually human. It's a human thing to do and go and manage your value stream. Yeah. But there are tools to help automate that, and that's where ConnectAll and other companies come into play there, where we can integrate as small as connecting ServiceNow to Jira, or connecting GMT Hub to version 1, to Jira, to Zabbix for monitoring back in. We can orchestrate things to occur in your value stream with those tools you're using, and really let you improve flow by removing the waste of those things.
When we're talking about value stream mapping like this, how are you engaging with DevOps teams and the DevOps community with this?
So we're engaging at the DevOps piece by helping them improve flow, and what I call it the material flow. So when I think about DevOps, I think about the material flow. I think about code getting built, getting released, deployed, monitoring, and production. So there's multiple flows. I've done some writing on this around your governance model. So you have your top flow, and that's the work breakdown. Those are the artifacts, the defects, requirements, and all of that. And then you have the material flow. So what we're able to do, no matter what tool you have, because of the way we operate, we are able to harness information as things are moving through for our dashboard and analytics. Then we're also letting companies automate those things. So I could check my code back in, and I could have that ConnectAll could see that and then automatically run a scan from SonarQube. Or automatically, based upon the right tasks and things be done, have a product like Octopus Deploy do its stuff, or Circle CI. So we're able to orchestrate and operate with the other tools in the value stream, allowing for better flow and better management of the governance.
As we think about what's going on in the world around us now with the pandemic and everything, has that affected you guys as far as your work environment? I'm sure it has, because you have to go remote, but were you remote before?
Yeah. So so we're all basically remote, but most everybody that was in one of our offices is all remote now as well. And the overall impact for ConnectAll has just been minimal. I think the biggest impact is felt because we're not in conferences together.
Yeah.
We're not networking, right? We're talking to people we know, but we're just not networking. But from a working perspective, not a lot of impact. Not a lot of impact on our business either. I mean, from a business perspective, we are just taking off this year. And, oh my goodness, who's ConnectAll, right? So here we are. Even though we've been doing this for a long time, our branding and our marketing and what we're doing is starting to take off because the whole value stream management market, which we've been in for a while, is starting to accelerate as well.
Yeah, the companies are really seeing the value in it. Value stream mapping, there is value, right? One of the things that people will want to know from you is, are you hiring?
So we are, yeah. We're hiring in all different kind of facets of the business at the moment.
North America, global, what are you looking for?
Mostly North America right now. We're looking for value stream management consultants, people that can go in and work with companies and consult with them. We're looking for some salespeople as well. And then we're doing some hiring in our infrastructure team, because as you can imagine, our infrastructure for testing and all of that is pretty complicated. And we have a great testing harness that lets us do all these tests across all of our connections of all those different tools. But there's a lot of VMs involved and a lot of tests that happen when we do our automated process.
All right, cool. So you are hiring, you look for people in North America, which moves us directly into November 12th. You guys are one of the major sponsors for All Day DevOps. Just curious, what are you looking forward to most? I mean, it's the largest event of its type in the world. There's got to be some stuff that you guys saw that's cool.
It is really cool. And I'm looking forward to not just my, getting ConnectAll's name out there through the great venue offer, but getting in front of some of those sessions that you have going on around DevOps and see where ConnectAll really does play. I've been looking at some of the DevSecOps space and where ConnectAll kind of plays in there as well, and how we get feedback loops from some of that back into, your planning tools and so on. And I want to understand a lot more about observability, because I have a feeling that there's this connection between observability and value stream management. And I'm trying to bring that together as I look at it.
It's interesting. I was talking to the CEO of Moogsoft yesterday, and their whole platform is around observability. And it just, after I talked to him, I started seeing the word and the term just starting to pop up on my radar where I hadn't noticed it before.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that works. And you've got a session, right? All Day DevOps?
I do have an all-day dev session, and I'm going to do it on feedback loops, DevOps feedback loops.
Give me an overview. What are you going to talk about?
And we'll talk about how to look for feedback loops, improve feedback loops. Usually when I do these sessions, I don't really go deep into our product. I like to give valuable information and then talk a little bit about how we do it. But I want to talk about how you can look at a system and look for the feedback loops and what type of feedback loops are in there, and just kind of give a good overview of how amplifying feedback loops is really important from a DevOps, DevSecOps, and a value stream management perspective.
Excellent. I've been talking with Lance Knight, the COO of ConnectAll, who is one of the major sponsors of All Day DevOps. Lance, thanks for all you're doing for the community and your support for All Day DevOps.
Thank you.
All right. Mark Miller here, co-founder of All Day DevOps, and we will see you on November 12th.
All right. Next, we're going to go to our managing editor, Chief Content Officer, Charlene O'Hanlon. Excuse me. Charlene, as usual, has a roll-up of the news around the different MediaOps sites today, a great preview of webinars that are upcoming on the MediaOps channels, as well as two good interviews. One is with Will Bass from Flexential, and the other one is with Kevin O'Brien, Great Horn. Good stuff. Take it away, Charlene.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Thursday edition of the news headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that addresses the state of application testing. This article takes a deep dive into a report by Testlio based on anonymized data from its customer base, and it found a correlation between quality, speed, and customer adoption. For example, according to the survey results, only 50% of customers would download an app that had a 3-star rating, and software that was released more frequently had higher review scores. There are some other interesting stats in the article worth looking at if you're doing mobile application development, or even if you're not, as it's interesting to see the relationship between speed, quality, and the way customers interact or don't interact with certain apps. We also have an interesting piece on how organizations can create an infrastructure as code security and governance program. And this is a step-by-step guide that organizations can use to add infrastructure as code security into their CI/CD pipelines to enforce security without slowing down developers. It's a nascent area still, but it's growing. We even have an IT as code section on DevOps.com. As more organizations adopt infrastructure as code to help solve issues, including those around security and performance, it's worth putting a pin in this article for referencing today and in the future. In news, Zero North has added a defect density dashboard to its software as a service platform for managing and orchestrating application security scans. This is an interesting offering. The dashboard borrows a concept that is employed to measure software quality and applies it to application security. It surfaces the number of application security defects per 1,000 lines of code discovered during scans of code by SCA and SAST tools. And that metric will be the key performance indicator that application security champions within DevOps teams and others can use to measure their progress in improving overall application security. Also, Logs.io has added support for the open source Jaeger distributed tracing software to its observability platform, which itself is based on a curated instance of Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, affectionately known as ELK software. Jaeger is finding traction among DevOps teams who are deploying microservices-based applications based on containers, which tend to have a lot of dependencies that are challenging to monitor and troubleshoot. And by extending its platform to ingest Jaeger data, Logs.io can address the observability needs of these environments and others using the Jaeger agent software, which is now being deployed by more organizations more widely to instrument complex distributed computing applications. Okay, over on Container Journal, DigitalOcean announced a slew of offerings at its virtual Deploy by DigitalOcean event, including a container registry and a Deploy to DigitalOcean button to its application platform, which automates the deployment of open source code to the DigitalOcean cloud service from a GitHub repository. The additions signal the company's moves to go beyond its roots as a less expensive alternative for building and deploying applications to provide developers with a higher level of abstraction for building and deploying container applications through a managed Kubernetes service and a PaaS environment. And LogDNA has added support for Kubernetes events and resource metrics to its namesake log management platform for applications that can be deployed in the cloud or on premises. Kubernetes events and resource metrics related to a specific service now can be viewed alongside application logs, which enables developers to troubleshoot and resolve deployment issues without requiring them to have specialized knowledge of Kubernetes tooling. In general, or the goal, according to the company, is to make it easier for developers to troubleshoot Kubernetes environments alongside all the other platforms that LogDNA already supports. And over on Security Boulevard, we have an interesting article that takes a look at the growing issue of identity fraud in the hiring process. Now that companies are working remotely almost 100%, the hiring process has changed. No more in-person, in-office interviews, and that opens the door for identity fraud and the possibility of opening the corporate network to cyber criminals. It's a troubling aspect of remote work, especially since 8 in 10 organizations believe they have experienced employee or candidate identity fraud, according to the article. And what's more, nearly half of organizations taking part in another survey said they weren't prepared for a remote hiring and onboarding process, which means they are definitely not prepared to handle identity verification remotely. Yet, identity verification is a must for organizations now more than ever. And we look at the concept of secure enclaves to keep the most critical data secure at all times. The Achilles heel of data security is that data must be decrypted to be used, which makes it fundamentally insecure. In today's computer architectures, all data, including those running in applications, must remain unencrypted in memory. It's then relatively easy for hackers to gain access to any data simply by getting physical or remote root access to hosted hardware. By dumping the memory, they can find the data or the keys to encrypted data they need. Secure enclaves may be the answer to that fundamental security flaw. Chip makers are now building specialized security features into their CPUs and platforms that enable the ability to create protected computing environments known as secure enclaves. Within secure enclaves, applications and other data, including encryption keys, are protected from theft or attack, even in the event that an insider or attacker gains physical or root access. Some neat stuff right there. All right, that's all I have for headlines today. Please check back on Monday when we will have a fresh batch for you. Until then, please have a great weekend and stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Will Bass, who's Vice President of Cybersecurity Services at Flexential. Will, thanks so much for taking the time talking with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Great. So let's talk about Flexential. I'm not real familiar with your company, so I wonder if you can kind of tell me a little bit about what you guys do and what your focus is on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Flexential, we've been around for about 20 years. We are actually a combination of two primarily data center companies, BioWest and Peak 10, merged in 2017. And that's when Flexential was born, which is really kind of how we view our IT services and how we work with our customers. It's a combination of flexible and essential. So really trying to help in those spaces. So we do co-location, we do private cloud, we do disaster recovery. And then we also have our professional services arm, which is where I'm located, and I've run our cybersecurity practice within our professional services organization.
Nice. Okay. So you, I imagine, have seen kind of events unfolding over the last 6 or 8 months or so regarding the pandemic. I imagine you guys have a totally different perspective on the, just the way things have kind of gone through, with so many organizations sending their employees home to work fully remotely. What have you guys seen? What are some of the trends that you guys have seen in that space of time?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been challenging for a lot of organizations out there sending their workforce home. That certainly happened with us. We're back in the office on a very limited basis at this point, with primarily most people working from home. I've been in the office just a couple of times in the last 6 months, which is certainly different. So really what we've kind of seen is back in March when this happened, organizations had, either a couple of days or maybe a week to shift their workers to remote working. And so what that led to is making, business decisions over security decision and getting their workers at home, getting them to work however they possibly can, so that business can continue and not really taking security into effect. So they were making security compromises. They were opening up things on their firewalls that probably shouldn't be opened. They were letting workers work from home systems because a lot of organizations do not have enough laptops for all of their employees. So now that you have home systems that are then now connecting back into the corporate network. So you saw kind of a lot of security compromise so they could keep business going, which has been a real challenge because the bad actors also realized this pretty quickly, which really has kind of expanded the threat landscape to all of these additional devices that are now out there and potential and frankly easier targets than it is to try and get through all the defenses that you typically have at the edge of a corporation or an organization.
Yeah, and I do know that so many organizations were wholly unprepared to have an entire workforce accessing their VPNs at the same time. It just kind of broke the networks here, for a lot of companies. So a lot of lessons learned over the last 6 months. But one of the things that I've been wondering about is, it seems like a lot of networks, home networks, were actually able to manage the capacity of having more people using the network between people working at home and then the kids logging on remotely for school and things of that nature. So the bandwidth requirements actually seemed to be there, but it was the security that was really kind of behind the times. And I don't know if that was more to do with the fact that companies just didn't think ahead, and really honestly, who would have been able to predict something like this would happen, and they would have to have that amount of security. But whether it was a company thing or whether consumers just weren't locking down their networks to the point where they would be secure working remotely full time. So what's the next step here for these home networks and the security and making sure that the stay-at-home workforce is actually going to be protected?
Yeah, absolutely. Organizations really need to kind of help their employees create secure work environments for themselves, because that's the challenge. When you get to the home networks, you have IoT devices, you have kids working on their personal devices as well. You might have a work computer being shared inside of at home, and maybe the kid goes to a website that they're not supposed to. You also don't have those typical defenses at the perimeter at work to prevent access to certain websites or certain things that on a home network just aren't there. So kind of one of the first steps that an organization take is educate their employees, tell them what some of the steps are that they can take to be able to make sure that they're doing things securely. And then one of the other things you need to do is make sure when devices are coming into your network, they're not bringing in any malware or ransomware or other type problem back into the environment. It would be one thing if someone's personal or work laptop got ransomware, it's in their home network. A whole other thing if that ransomware then makes its way back into your organization and spreads across the entire network.
Right. And that's certainly something that we have been seeing more and more about. I think I heard or I read a statistic that ransomware attacks are up something like 400% over the last 12 months, which is just astounding to me. But it's certainly, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, to your point, cyber criminals have really taken advantage of the situation. Are you advocating then that corporate networks or corporate IT departments kind of need to be the help desk, if you will, for home networks moving forward, or what's the end game there?
I think for particular users, particularly ones that have access to sensitive information, that are more likely to be targets of spear phishing type of attack, I think the organizations really needed to kind of help take over the management of those home networks. So you're talking about people in the C-suite, people in finance, maybe some people in P, that if they're compromised could lead to a serious issue within the company. So that could mean everything from going and actually purchasing and setting up their network, helping them configure their network, making sure that they have a separate area for those work devices. That's kind of one of the things that you should be doing. You should encourage for all employees to do, but for these key employees is going out and setting up a and setting up a separate wireless network so they can connect to that. It's segmented from the rest of the network so that if they have an IoT device or something else on the network that gets compromised, it's not going to come back and compromise the work laptop as well. And so that way you can kind of isolate yourself and isolate those potential problems from that rest of that home network, because we are seeing that where particularly, when it comes to spear phishing and those type things, the bad actors out there know if the CFO, of this company, they're probably going to be able to figure out their personal email address. So instead of trying to get through all those work emails, maybe they target them through their personal email, hope to compromise the device, and then use that to get back into the network that way. It's a lot easier than going through all of the defenses that you would have on a corporate network.
Right. Okay. So we're looking now at kind of these hybrid work environments. To your point, you've got some people working in the office a couple days a week. Same here in our organization. There's going to be this elastic workforce moving back and forth. Does that have any implications regarding security, whether the person is working in the office or working at home? I mean, what are some of the considerations there that organizations need to keep in mind moving forward as that workforce becomes increasingly elastic?
Absolutely. One of the keys here is you have to push as many of your security protections out to the end devices as possible. So this is making sure that you have EDR on the systems, making sure that they're actually able to get updates. That's one of the challenges that we saw. A lot of organizations had it set up so that you got your patches when you came back onto the corporate network. Well, if you're not on the network for 3 months, 6 months, that's a big problem. So making sure that security can be pushed out there, making sure that you have the right tools on there that then can actually report back to the network. So if there is a problem on one of these devices, hopefully you're identifying it before it comes back onto the network. But then when devices do come back onto the network, if there are ways that you can come in and make sure that before it actually gets full access to everything on the network, you're doing scans of it to make sure that the systems are safe before they come back in and before they potentially spread whatever problems they may have picked up when they're outside of the environment.
Okay. All right. What about for organizations that actually don't have a quote unquote corporate network? They do all of their applications are web-based and they don't actually log on via VPN or something like that. And all the communications are done by, Slack or email or, by Trello boards, things like that. Are there any different security implications and considerations that organizations need to keep in mind there?
Yeah, and I think it's good for this and really for any organizations to try and move as much that zero trust model as you can. The point where you're not you're basically verifying that this is the right person that's actually logging in for when they're trying to get access to ideally all applications, but certainly your critical applications, certainly any applications that happen to be out in the cloud, because those aren't necessarily behind your corporate firewall. So making sure that you have that multi-factor authentication and other things in place to make sure that so if a system does get compromised, even if their password gets compromised, you have the ability to stop them before they actually get access to the data, which is really what you're trying to protect here is that data.
All right. Great stuff. Well, I appreciate your walking me through it. I will be interested to see how things kind of met out in the next 6 months or so as we, maybe hopefully get closer to the end of this pandemic and things get quote unquote back to normal, like that's ever going to happen. But, we can always dream, right? So.
Personally, I don't think that's going to, I think we're going to shift to at least a partial, fully remote workforce. So I think it's important for organizations to make sure that they're thinking about that and planning long term, because I don't think we're going to go back to the normal. Everyone shows up in the office 5 days a week ever again.
Well, there's definitely something to be said about that. I think that's been a long time coming anyway, regardless of the pandemic. So I'm really, if there's the silver lining to this, I think that's it. So, but thank you very much for taking the time and walking me through some of the tips that organizations should be, considering for, fully remote, fully secure workforce. So thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Great. Hope to have you again soon. We'll
Absolutely.
Talk about it again. All right. Great. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Thursday edition of the Webinars Preview. As always, we have so many great webinars happening on DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, and Container Journal, available for your viewing pleasure, both upcoming and on demand on the websites. But wanted to let you know about 3 that are happening, so you can mark your calendar and attend. The first webinar is called Managing Your Full Application Lifecycle Using GitOps. It's happening this Friday, November 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com, and it's sponsored by CodeFresh. This webinar will explore the fundamental principles of GitOps and the outcomes of those principles. And we'll try to answer some of the fundamental questions that people have, such as why do we want GitOps? Why isn't everyone else using GitOps? And whether GitOps is mature enough for everyone to adopt it. The webinar also will show how GitOps can fit into the continuous delivery lifecycle, the continuous delivery cycle, and how it might change the way organizations define application lifecycle pipelines. Interesting stuff. All right, the second webinar I want to let you know about is happening Monday, November 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. It's called Pen Test as a Service Impact 2020. This one is sponsored by Cobalt. This webinar pulls apart the findings of a recent PTAAS, Pen Testing as a Service Impact Report 2020, which focuses on the benefits and challenges of deploying a SaaS-based pen testing model in a modern software development environment. This is a panel discussion. It features Carolyn Wong of Cobalt, Ryan Stinson of HubSpot, and Dr. Zhenxi Wang of Rain Capital. And they'll be discussing, among other things, the impact of DevOps on application security, why SaaS-driven companies are expanding pen testing scopes and frequency, and how pen testing as a service adapts to meet the speed of DevOps. That should be an interesting webinar for sure. All right, the third one I want to let you know about is called Demystify the DevOps Landscape with the Periodic Table of DevOps Tools and DevOps Diagram Generator. That's a long title. That one's happening Tuesday, November 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It's sponsored by Digital.ai. Now, the company put together the Periodic Table of DevOps Tools a couple of years back, and it's a great resource for identifying those best-of-breed tools across the software development and delivery lifecycle. The company also put together the DevOps Diagram Generator, which lets organizations select the DevOps tools used in their software delivery pipeline and dynamically generate a custom view of where each tool fits and how they relate to each other and where there are gaps. So this webinar will show attendees how to use these free tools to discover what's new in the DevOps tooling landscape, gain an end-to-end insight into the software release pipeline, detect and plug holes in their delivery process, and identify new tools that may improve their software delivery lifecycle. Awesome, awesome. I am really excited about that webinar. Going to be some really good stuff there. going to be some really good stuff in all of these webinars, so I hope you're able to join me for them. As I said earlier, all the webinars are available on the sites, DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, and Container Journal, both upcoming and on demand. And I will be back on Monday with a brand new, fresh batch of webinars for you. But until then, please have a great weekend and stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with a fellow fine Irishman, Kevin O'Brien, who is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Great Horn. Kevin, thank you so much for taking a few minutes and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Charlene. Nice to speak with you.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Great Horn.
Yeah, absolutely. So Great Horn is a cloud-native email security company, which means we help organizations, typically large enterprises and mid-market sized companies with hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of users, protect themselves from the kinds of advanced email threats that are reaching their end users in environments like Office 365 or Google Workplace, what up until a few weeks ago was G Suite. So organizations that have made that jump to cloud and are either still using legacy technology to protect themselves, the secure email gateways that came out in the early 2000s, or those organizations that are relying exclusively on the security controls made available by Microsoft and Google, and are finding that things are reaching their users and causing risk and are looking for solutions to try to address that. And we protect today about 1.5 billion emails on a monthly basis. So I've been around for about 6 years. Company is based in Boston, Massachusetts, and our focus point is really on that advanced attack space.
All right, great. Well, you guys recently came out with the results of a survey that you conducted about email phishing attempts, and sounds like we're not doing as well as we should be.
Yeah, there are a couple of really interesting things that came out in that survey. So a word on methodology, we interviewed, or rather we put the survey out and collected data from nearly 1,200 respondents over the course of, I think, a 3-week period. And the way that we did it, we took real fish from our data set, from what we're seeing in the wild, and turned that into a set of slightly modified, changing some of the personally identifiable features of the senders, but leaving the content intact, images that we put on the phishing test, which was a microsite that we had on greathorn.com. And then we invited users to go and go through it. And there were about 10 questions. And we randomized the data set so people saw them in different orders. So there was no bias inherent in, oh, I got all the fish up front sort of thing. And we also made half of them randomly available with a piece of technology that we call Mailbox Intelligence. Mailbox Intelligence comes with the Great Horn platform, and it gives a potentially non-technical end user a visual representation of what they're seeing. How risky is this and why? And then half without. And again, those were randomly distributed, and it wasn't the same ones for everybody. And so we wanted to ask the question to the market, how well do people who are seeing emails and are in fact ready for some of them to be phishing emails? So already synthetically, they should be more tuned in. They're not busy and on their phone, at 8 a.m. when they're about to jump into a meeting. They're primed for this. How well do they do? And we found that on average, people are about as good as a coin flip. We have about a 50-50 rate there. Half of the time, users will incorrectly identify something as a phish when it is not, or as safe when it is a phish. And there are some kind of unusual findings in that as well. So one level down from that, maybe we talk a bit about what that looks like, and you kind of see that's not what we expected to see.
Yeah. So tell me, were there certain trends that came out of the study based on what the users actually, how they fared and how they selected what they did?
Yeah. So let's talk demographics first. So we also collected demographic information from users around age and professional career path, et cetera. And if you compared the cohort of respondents between 18 and 44 to those who were over 45 years old, we found a bit more cynicism in the latter group, which is to say respondents over the age of 45 we're more likely to view messages as suspicious or as phish, regardless of whether they were or were not. And so there's a potentially part of that digital divide, generational gap there, where people who have only ever grown up with technology in their hands, 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, are more trusting of email than those of us who perhaps started our careers when that wasn't how we did things and evolved into that space. We also found that, again, there's a divide in terms of how people would view it. But those users who took the survey on a mobile client, and bear in mind, this is a website, right? So this has more information than a typical mobile email client will have. They were 13% less likely to identify phish correctly on a mobile device, even with all of that data. And these images were screenshots of what it would look like if you were sitting down in front of, say, a web browser or Outlook on your laptop or on your desktop. And even with all that extra information, just being on a mobile device made you less likely to detect whether something was or wasn't legitimate.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. The demographic thing really strikes me, because you would think that younger folks are a little bit more attuned to, what's suspicious and what's not, just because they are digital natives. But at the same time, I don't think a lot of, the younger generation, if you will, are using email that often. So do you think that maybe that has something to do with it? The fact that maybe it's not their platform of choice for communication, and so they're not as familiar with, what normal is with an email?
Yeah, I think that you've put your finger on something there. And the kinds of messages that people were the least capable of identifying correctly were messages that looked like business services. So, if you put up a message, and we did this, and we put a phish out as one of the early softballs in this data set, and it's an impersonation of Amazon. And so we did something where we had a giant Amazon logo, oversized at the top of the email. And then it had all of the information. You had to go and click on something. And it was phish. No, there's an actual one taken from the wild. 75% of our respondents got that one right. So that's an example of, look, we all, regardless of age or demographic, we all most likely order things from Amazon, or at least have seen how that works. And, when a phishing attack happens, one of the techniques that attacker will sometimes rely on is that big logo. And everyone kind of says, but that's not how Amazon works. You don't get it's almost screen-sized Amazon logo at the top. But, I'll give you a different example. We had a Microsoft Teams, the collaboration platform that comes with Office 365 message, right? And it claims to be, oh, you have unread messages in Teams. And it's actually a pretty reasonable one. But those emails, there are some things that were a little bit off. The return path was wrong. The sending address was wrong. It was clearly a phish. 53% of our respondents said that it was not a phish. So they did worse than a coin flip, just a little bit. And I think that, to your point, how often do we, if you were to compare, receive Amazon emails that we're looking at for things we might have ordered versus Teams messages? We're just not as good at this business service side of the message flow, especially if you're talking about a demographic that may not interact with those services outside of their professional world or their professional email account.
Right. It's really fascinating to me to see I see stuff come through my inbox every single day, and I just actually laugh out loud a few times, because I'm like, yeah, that is so not legit. So, to hear, the fact that, we as a society basically are failing when it comes to spotting phishing emails is unnerving, to say the least. And I would imagine for a business owner, it's got to be downright frightening. So what are some of the steps that organizations can take to help, keep their data secure especially when we're talking about a workforce that's now almost entirely working from home, and they don't have a lot of the technology lockdowns, if you will, or security controls that they would in the office?
Yeah, great question. Look, there's probably a tendency for a vendor to want to say, well, just buy my software. But the answer is there is no silver bullet. There's no one-stop shop that solves this problem. Phishing is effective. It's really effective. Most data breaches involve email threats at some point, usually at the very beginning of the attack, whether that's to harvest credentials or to gain information. And just briefly to give you an example of that, a few weeks ago, we were part of a team that uncovered a major phishing attack, and we saw it go after CEOs and CFOs. And it was a global attack, and it leveraged a whole bunch of sophisticated Apache web server compromises and used brands like Sony of Europe and Adobe and Subway to launch these emails into executive inboxes. It was worldwide. And we saw tens of thousands of C-level executives click on those links and both install malware on the endpoint device, their home computer, and also give away their credentials. And we pitched the media, and we talked a lot about this, and we got a little bit of security trade press. The media said, well, where's the breach? We can't talk about this until it's an Equifax event. And I said, well, that's going to happen in about 6 months, right? The answer here is two things. The first is process for those employees. And that is making certain that they are receiving good training, that you have looked at how they're accessing their work email. I'm sitting in front of my home computer and not my work laptop, because I've been sitting in this office for the last 8 months and will be for the foreseeable future, and it's a bigger screen. And so knowing that, you can work with your team and then answer the technology question, augment in a way that doesn't block, that doesn't try to prevent a user from getting to the work they want to get to. But as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, can I give that CEO or that CFO or that employee a little bit of additional context? Is the message I'm looking at realistic? And so if you know about what's happening on the device, and you've done the right training to help them identify what are the risks that I should be thinking about, and then you augment the technology to address those risks. This isn't, I bought something and it solved my.
All right. Well, really interesting things to think about when we're talking about phishing, because, obviously it's a problem that is becoming more prevalent as organizations are increasingly remote, and employees are obviously not paying as much attention as they should be with their emails. So I hope things get better I hope things get better. Period. But Kevin, thank you so much for walking me through the results of your survey, and let's circle back in a couple months and see if things have changed. Okay.
Thanks, Charlene. I appreciate it.
All right. Great. Well, thanks for joining me today. Really do appreciate it. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Thanks very much, Charlene. Hope you enjoyed Charlene's interviews today, and of course the news and webinar previews. Next up, we have a double barrel of channel roundup with the one and only Mike Vizard. Mike's guests today are from Palo Alto Networks, Mario Espinoza, Vice President of Data Protection and SaaS Security. And then from Fairwinds, he has Vice President of Engineering, Sarah Zelichowski. And good stuff there. Let's go over now to Mike Vizard on Channel Roundup.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Mario Espinoza, who is the Vice President of Data Protection and SaaS Security for Palo Alto Networks. Mario, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm very excited to be here with you.
Pleased to have you. You just published a blog basically calling for an overhaul of data loss protection from end to end. We need to rethink this whole thing. We've been at it for 2 decades now. What's wrong? I thought we had the problem solved.
Well, data protection is today more important than ever before, Michael. So with the pandemic, with remote work, with the people using more and more tools like SaaS applications, organizations' information is at risk more than ever. There is more regulation. So there is this concern about data privacy. And because of that, there is regulation coming up in Europe like GDPR, CCPA. In California, we just voted, to increase the regulatory power of CCPA in California. There are other regulations coming up in India and also in Brazil. So data protection, big concerns for customers. But when I talk to customers, when I talk to CISOs all the time, they say, hey, there are solutions out there, but they're extremely complex. They are very expensive, and they require a lot of people. These three problems are there. And because of that, only a very small number of organizations can use data protection. Only those massive, mega large organizations can afford millions and millions of dollars and very large teams to operate those data protection. What we are doing at Palo Alto Networks is to rethink and reimagine data protection. So we believe that data protection can be simpler, that it can be accessible to all organizations. So what we did is to launch the first cloud-delivered enterprise DLP. And I'm going to highlight this three concept because it's cloud-delivered. There is nothing to deploy. So there are no proxies, no agents, none of this third-party tools that you need to put. You just click, on a button, and data protection is there, cloud-delivered. It's comprehensive because you can't protect your information if you only protect one channel, one vector of leak. It's like being in a boat with many holes, right? And you say, oh, I'm going to only plug one hole. The water is going to come out, right? So it's going to come in, sorry. So what you need to do is to protect comprehensively all channels, and we do that. And the third element is that it has to be enterprise class. Some cloud vendors out there, they're putting very lightweight data protection tools, a little bit more than regular expressions and keywords, and those are not sufficient. So Palo Alto Network is bringing comprehensive enterprise DLP, 100% delivered in the cloud. So that's different. It's a different way of thinking about, and this will bring benefits to customers because now smaller organizations, medium-sized organizations, they don't have to invest millions of dollars to protect their sensitive data. And we know that everyone wants to protect their sensitive data, their secret sauce, right? Their credit card numbers, everything that is sensitive and it's key to the corporation.
Do you think that data loss prevention is becoming more widely adopted or will become more widely adopted than it has been if we do make it simpler? And I'm asking the question because every time I look at a survey, somebody, they check the box, they got AV and they got firewalls, check. And then all the other security tools start to fall off the cliff in terms of adoption. It's just like maybe 60% and then below 50% after that. Will this change the way people think about DLP and will they actually do it?
I think that the global trends, both in utilization of data and technology, only tell us that data protection is going to be more and more important. So the need is there and it's very strong. Regulatory fines are in the billions of dollars these days, right? So this is a really, really big concern for CEOs, for board, for everybody. So the demand is there. So the problem is that the solutions don't satisfy that demand. So now by bringing this solution that is cloud delivered, that is actually comprehensive and that lowers that barrier of entry, I'm convinced that people will adopt this way more than before. And I think that it's super important to highlight that analysts, and experts have predicted that regulations like GDPR will drive DLP adoption by more than 20% in the coming years. So they are predicting an uptick in data loss prevention.
Do you think that will be managed by security people, or is there somebody else in the equation, whether it's compliance people or whoever, who's managing this? And what ultimately is the relationship between those teams?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. So what I've seen is that compliance plays a big role in data protection. Is one of the big drivers, right? So compliance teams really need solutions to do data protection, and typically they drive projects. But almost always there's a partnership between the compliance teams and also the security teams. So I've seen both collaborating, and the organizations that are more successful in data protection are those that really go through the step of getting visibility, then notifying end users, educating them, and protecting. And this is only achieved when you have a solution that can, walk you through these steps. So compliance and security are gonna collaborate on this.
Do you think as it moves to the cloud, then it also becomes part of this DevSecOps motion that people are talking about a lot? I know DLP doesn't always come to mind in the exact same sentence as DevOps and DevSecOps, but things are becoming more automated by the day. So what's the relationship and what's the arc of all these things?
Yeah, historical DLP was thought as a bolt-on, right? So it was thought as something that you put on top of your environment, right? You deploy things like proxies or agents, and it's an afterthought. So as we have this shift left, so people are thinking more in cloud terms, right? So they are thinking about microservices. They're thinking about cloud-based data protection, something that they can integrate early on in the development of solutions. So for example, our solution, because it's cloud, can help people scan AWS, GCP, Azure, all cloud providers at the DevOps level when they are developing those applications. So absolutely, that will happen, and our solution solve that problem for infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, but also for SaaS applications. So you will see people on DevOps using our data protection, but also people that use package applications like SaaS applications. If they use Office 365 or Google Drive or things like Salesforce, our solution can also scan, and protect the data stored in those platforms.
The volume of data has not only increased, but so has the velocity. So how do we keep pace with all the data that's being created all over the place now, and some of which needs to be protected more aggressively than others? So how do we get policies that kind of follow the data around wherever it's supposed to go?
Yeah, so data is distributed more than ever right now, scattered, right? So, and it's not scattered in two places. It's like hundreds, thousands of places, right? So people use thousands of SaaS applications to it. So you recognize immediately that legacy solutions that are bolt-on cannot work. There is no way that you're gonna follow all this. You need a solution that is born in the cloud, right? So it has to be cloud native. It has to follow the data wherever it goes. For example, our solution, because it's 100% cloud native, it can be connected to all SaaS applications natively, either inline or using APIs. So we do both. And because we do that, you can have this coverage. You can follow what you describe as this expansion of the data landscape, right? So we cover SaaS, we cover infrastructure as a service, we cover the native network. So even if you have remote users or users in branches, you can also see all the applications that are accessed there. They can be thousands of applications, and we'll be able to protect that data.
Will the data get smarter? We've been tagging data for years, but I have to wonder if at some point we'll be able to do something with the data when it's created that makes it easier to manage and secure. Is that something people are still talking about?
There are many solutions to try to protect data, right? The most effective up to this point has been DLP. So the DLP can really look at what is the sensitive data and find it wherever it is, monitor how it's being used, and also protect it. But there are other technologies that can help you in that process. So for example, our solution integrates with tagging systems. So if you have something like Microsoft AIP and you're doing labeling of certain information, our solution in the cloud can read those labels and apply DLP policy inline and address both. So I think security solutions need to integrate. And our approach at Palo Alto Networks is to make our solution able to integrate with those tagging mechanisms.
It feels like, I don't know if it's true or not, but it feels like a lot of these regulations have been given a pass during the COVID era. The government's kind of let everybody kind of maybe slide for a couple of months here and there. So do you think that people will get more aggressive about enforcing those regulations going into 2021, or is it still going to be a little soft?
So what I've heard from customers talking to CISOs directly is that data protection is driven, yes, by regulation, but also for business need. So the companies don't want to have a breach. They don't want to lose the trust of the customers because there was a breach. They don't want to lose their secret sauce, that intellectual property that gives the company an advantage, and also regulation. So I have not seen diminished interest in data protection during these times. Actually, I have seen an increase in the interest of data protection. Are these regulations going to drive more growth? Absolutely. They're going to increase. The enforcement is going to come. But actually, I think that companies also want to do the right thing. So I don't think they need somebody to be pressuring them. They actually have their own concern about data protection, concern about their customer data and their own data. So we are going to see more use of solutions like Palo Alto Networks DLP in the future.
All right, I have this dream, and maybe it exists and nobody uses it, but here's my dream. It's called the Mission Impossible feature. The data goes beyond a certain area and it just self-destructs, and then I don't have to go looking for it or worry what happened to it or go investigate the dark web to see who has my data. So my question to you is, can we get to that level of automation, or are we there and just nobody's using the capability?
So two technologies are enabling what we're doing at Palo Alto Networks. So why we can do right now what I just described, right? 100% cloud delivered, comprehensive DLP. So why now? Why not before, right? Why are we rethinking DLP today? So there have been tremendous advances in machine learning. So without getting too technical into the new deep learning models have the ability to be trained on the fly much faster, and they have accurate results, much more accurate than previous technologies. And the other is automation. So for example, Palo Alto Networks has invested heavily in SOAR capabilities. So we're leveraging some of that technology with our XOR platform to really automate the response and automate those things. So what you described, it's very close to happen. And we're investing in making something very similar to that happen. Looking at information wherever it is, based on location. For example, our solution today is aware of where the data is and where the user is. So it respects automatically data residency requirements. So if you are in the European Union, it will know, hey, I'm in this country. I should store the information locally. I should not let the information go out of this jurisdiction. So very similar, not exactly what you were describing, but the technology is there. So I think we're very close to make your dream come true.
All right, Mario, I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to check in with you next year and say, where are we on this? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Hey, Mario, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sarah Zelahowski, who's the VP of Engineering for Fairwind. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You guys published a new maturity model for Kubernetes. Now, you don't see the words maturity and Kubernetes in the same sentence very often. So walk us through what that's about.
Sure. So Fairwinds has been in the Kubernetes space for about the last 4 years, but 5 years in the infrastructure space, trying to help customers make big technical transformations. And with containers and virtualization, there's a lot that goes into a technical transformation. And so we've seen a lot of customers make that transition. And over the years, we've built kind of a really strong tool belt of helping customers in that space make the transition. And recently, what we realized was that for customers and for all the companies out there who are making that transition, there aren't as many resources out there after you get past what I call the up and running stage, right? Once you've got Kubernetes up and running, you've got containers ready to go, where do you go from there? And a lot of the time, people have to figure out for themselves what's next. And if they're struggling, if they're having challenges, if they want to do something new or push the boundaries of what's possible, they don't have a lot of support in that. And so what we've tried to do with our maturity model is expand the understood journey of the Kubernetes transformation and go past that up and running stage and say, here are the different phases that you may go through in your maturity as you adopt Kubernetes. And here's what you're going to struggle with. And here's what you're going to be learning. And here's how you can handle those situations and those decisions, and really just kind of help everybody in the community understand that journey a little bit better so that we can all have a more smooth path, I think.
Do you think that Kubernetes is intimidating to the point where a lot of people are hesitant to make that transition, or they think twice about it, or they go slower?
Absolutely. Kubernetes is extremely powerful, and that can bring a lot of complexity. And I think if you don't understand it well, and if you're looking at the cloud native landscape with 50 million choices of which directions you can go, it's very intimidating. And without guidance to be able to boil that down into necessaries and priorities for yourself, and then be able to step through it, a step at a time, it can be very challenging. And either companies will test the waters and maybe get burnt and back off, or they'll get halfway down the road and then they'll understand now the complexity hits them and they maybe abandon it and pivot back. There's a lot of challenges I think that customers can or companies can go through because it is very intimidating and very complex.
Now, you guys manage Kubernetes environments, not just the cluster, but the other components around that on behalf of customers. So why did you feel the need to put together a maturity model when you were already doing all the heavy lifting?
That's a great question. So we like to work in partnership with our customers. They know their business better than we do. We know our business very well. And so as we build these long-term relationships with customers, we have to be in lockstep along the journey so that we each know where our responsibility lies and how we can best work together to make things smooth, right? And so it behooves us, as we step through that journey with a customer alongside them, that they know what they're going to be getting into and how they can interact with us and how we can help them along the way, so they don't feel like we're dragging them along, but that they're full participants in the process and that they understand what's going on.
Do you think that in some ways the settings in Kubernetes have been left deliberately kind of open-ended and not prescriptive? And that's, on the one hand, I guess, makes it a little more accessible, but also there seems to be people who would prefer a more prescriptive approach. So what's the right balance between what we see today with these kind of open-ended deployments that are prone to misconfigurations versus what I may need for something that's a little more, here's how to do it by the book kind of thing?
Right. Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it is left open-ended for a lot of reasons, but mostly because it's infinitely flexible. And so you can use it for almost anything. There are some things it's better to use for than others. But by leaving that configuration open to the user, it makes it capable of so many things, right? But what we found through our experience with customers is that regardless of your use case, there are a simple set of defaults and best practices that can fit maybe 85% of use cases, right? If you can get security, reliability, and efficiency set up with these basic defaults, then it'll get you most of the way through your journey to the point where you get mature enough to then start experimenting and pushing the envelope and maybe tweaking your configuration or setup to get what you want. And so I think there really is a default or a set of standards that are really strong that most people can pick up. And by balancing that, I think a lot of folks do that through managed Kubernetes, right? if you're talking about EKS, GKE, AKS, those offerings, there are a set of defaults. If you spin up a cluster in one of these cloud providers, you're getting a controlled control plane. You're getting certain node groups, certain security configuration, and that's a good enough default, right? I think it's generally good enough for experimentation, proof of concept, non-production work, right? Once you get past that into production or into scale, you have to start thinking about what's the next set of standards that I need to enact? What are the policies that I want to enforce at that level?
Well, let's talk about Kubernetes at scale then, because I think it's one thing to stand up a single cluster. And a lot of people had it in their heads that they were going to build maybe 1 or 2 clusters and have a lot of apps share that. But now we're seeing Kubernetes at the edge. And of course, a lot of application owners were absent that day. We all learned how to share in kindergarten. So they want their own cluster. What is the challenge of managing Kubernetes at scale these days?
Great question. Fairwinds has some interesting experience in that realm because, our business is to support many, many customers in this journey. And so we have the experience of supporting many, many clusters and many, many infrastructures. And so we've actually had to build our own tool set of open source tools to be able to manage Kubernetes at scale in that way, right? When you're talking about many different clusters that have to be in as similar configuration as possible, or to have many different aspects under control. And I think, our product, Fairwinds Insights, has done a really great job of allowing us to have a way to look at configuration across big installs, across many different types of Kubernetes installs, and be able to say, what are the aspects of these clusters that I need to get under control? What are the security risks that I need to look into? And really just kind of conglomerate your bigger worldview into one place so that you can control. I think that's the big, policy and control is the big topic these days, right? With OPA and things like that. Kubernetes at scale doesn't always have to mean sprawl, right? You don't want it to mean sprawl. I think that is chaos, right? When everybody has their own cluster, or you're trying to manage a cluster in every region for every set of customers that you have. What you really want to do is make logical groupings and make sure that you have consistent set of rules and policies that can help make sense of that, so that it is a more cohesive, holistic picture of Kubernetes at scale, as opposed to kind of this sprawling set of suburbs, I guess is what I would call it.
Do you think that there are any patterns that you're seeing in Kubernetes adoption? I talked to some people where, they're perfectly content to stand up their first cluster, and then they're like, yeah, I've done that, thanks, got it on the resume, and I'm pretty much out of here. Let's get somebody else to do this. And then there's other folks who are developers who are being charged or tasked with the responsibility as part of their DevOps motion, and then they go, well, I'd rather spend more of my time writing code. So what kind of behaviors or patterns are you seeing?
Oh, great question. So the most challenging pattern that I think exists is that there aren't very many training programs, boot camps, places where people can go get canonical Kubernetes education, right? There are definitely some online courses and things like that, and there are some certification programs, but most of the time you're going to be learning Kubernetes on the job, and that's a really challenging thing to do, right? And so what you're saying, but I got this cluster up and running, I'm going to go get a different gig, that's fine, but I think that often happens when you get into that level of complexity that we talked about. That's scary, where you don't know what's next. You don't have the support and education to be able to get, now that I've had this cluster built, how do I get it to perform at scale? Or how do I get it to be secure enough that I can be confident, putting my product out there in the world? Or how can I support the amount of load we're going to get at Black Friday, right? Like, that's a whole different ballgame. And I think that's a really challenging thing for people to learn on the job. Which another reason that the maturity model exists is to help people understand what challenges they're going to reach after that up and running, and start providing tie-ins of support into those later phases so that people can continue that process as opposed to bailing out early. As far as developers go, the big benefit of Kubernetes for the DevOps movement has been that we can empower developers to deploy into infrastructure and to share a similar language with operations folks, right? We have developers who understand what a deployment is. We have operations folks who understand what a deployment is. Now they can have a conversation. and we can allow and enable developers to actually kind of move their code into deployment and delivery, and unstick them and that type of thing. So there's a lot of empowerment that it gets them. But again, education is the problem, right? If you don't make it approachable, if you don't make it streamlined enough, if you make it a burden on the developer to learn complex topics and to troubleshoot and to pick up an entirely new skill set, that's often something they're not going to want to take on. And so the burden, I think, is on organizations to make that that language easy to learn, I guess.
Do you think that security people get the challenges around Kubernetes yet, or are they still starting to discover this conversation, and maybe that's part of this maturity conversation?
I think even containers in general is fairly new for security folks, right? The number of security folks that focus on containerized workloads and container orchestration systems, I think, is much smaller than in the bigger security community around virtualization and things like that, right? And so I think they're starting to pick up on it. As more and more people adopt Kubernetes, it will become a bigger attack vector, right? And there will be more sprawl, and there will be more places where security is a problem or needs to be paid attention to. And so there's a huge opportunity, I think, for security folks in the Kubernetes world to start injecting their fresh ideas based on older technologies about how we can start to control security in this space. But I think that's still relatively fresh and new for the security community.
Now, you guys have, I think, maybe a half a dozen or so open source projects. What's the thought process behind why an MSP like you feels the need to have these kind of open source projects, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
Yeah, great question. So Kubernetes itself is open source, and I think the community around it really values open source. And so to be an active participant in the community and to make sure you're getting engagement and giving back, but also getting interest, it's really important to have an open source portfolio. That's an important thing. But also as a participant in the community, you want to start pushing the boundaries of what's possible. By pushing the boundaries of what's possible, you're moving everybody along in the right direction, right? So we think that it's our responsibility to open source a portfolio of tools that's helpful to be able to start pushing the boundaries. But also, like I said earlier in this conversation, Fairwinds has a unique experience in this realm because we've helped so many different use cases and so many different companies use Kubernetes. We find the little spaces in between activities and patterns where a tool would be really helpful or a piece of software would be really useful that doesn't exist, right? And so, when we fill that hole, like we do with many of the open source projects on our GitHub, we think it's really important to put that back out into the world so that people can help us make it more robust, that we can think of more use cases that even we haven't seen yet, or that other people can wrap those into what they're doing and, kind of like I said, push things forward. We've only ever gotten really great engagement from our open source and made those pieces of software and tools even better. And so it's been really valuable for us to do that.
All right, so you've been running Kubernetes for some time now. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you first got started?
Ooh. That's a really great question. I'm going to hesitate. I think what I know now is that it's a much longer journey than you think it is. As a business, we want to get customers up and running on Kubernetes as quickly as possible because that's what everybody wants, especially small and medium-sized businesses who are startups and want to get going quickly. They see Kubernetes and containers as a way to get up and running on the latest technology as quickly as possible. And we want adoption to be a 6-week project, right? But it's often not. And thinking of it in that way is really limiting yourself. You will end up making rash decisions or choices that will eventually lead you to be limited in what you can do. You'll have to reverse your progress sometimes to fix some of the technical debt that you build. And for me, it just kind of highlights the fact that it's a big investment making a technical transformation like this. And you need to think about it ahead of time and try to future-proof yourself as much as you can by taking it one step at a time and by learning from others, and not just rushing to get up and running, right? And so I think that's why, just to loop it back to the maturity model, it's really important to take a look at, there are 7 phases in our maturity model. That seems really large and it seems very daunting. But if you look about it like, this is a big investment for your company that is ultimately going to pay dividends in your business, where it's going to be potentially cheaper. It's going to allow you to scale. It's going to allow you to manage your resources and potentially be more secure. You want to be able to do that to the best of your ability. And so getting in on best practices and standards and defaults and policy early on in the process and thinking about it and investing in it as a longer term journey, I think is a really important thing.
Great. Hey, Sarah, thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right, guys, back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Mike. Good stuff. Well, it's now time for head over to the Analyst Corner with Mitch. Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder at Accelerated Strategy Group. Accelerated Strategy Group actually released a new report they did, sponsored by the good folks over at Zetaset. And Mitchell has an interview with Zetaset CEO Tim Riley and Accelerated Strategy Group security analyst Charles Kalaji. And I think you're going to find that one interesting. Mitchell also has a good interview with our friends from Axlos. We have Ashay Anand, and then we also have David Church, Senior Advisor at Beyond 20. A little bit about what's going on there with Agile DevOps in large organizations, and of course, IDLE. So let's go to the Analyst Corner now with Mitchell Ashley of Accelerated Strategies Group.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I have the pleasure of being joined by a couple of great folks I love talking with on this topic. First is Tim Riley, who's CEO with Zetaset, and I'll have you guys introduce yourselves in just a minute. Second is Charles Kalaji, who I know from way back when he was an analyst with IDC and used to brief him, and he's working with Accelerated Strategies Group. Welcome, guys. Good to have you both on.
Well, thank you.
Let's start with you, Tim. Would you just give us a brief introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us about Zetaset?
Sure. This is Tim Riley, CEO of Zetaset. We do encryption, software-only encryption. We're based in the Bay Area. Been around a few years. My personal background is I've been in tech for now most of my career, 20 years, whether it's appliance, networking, telco, hardware, wireless networking, software, and finally security in the last 10 years. So I feel like I got a pretty good understanding of the world and how security fits in it.
It's kind of the requirement. You need to check a lot of those boxes these days to understand the whole scope of things. So fantastic background. Hey, Charles, how about yourself? Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the kind of research that you do.
All right, thank you, Mitch. And so as Mitch mentioned, I've been an analyst for many years with analyst firms, and I'm now working with Accelerated Strategies. So I cover, almost all the security markets, what the trends are, where they're going, what is hot, or in some cases, I got to tell vendors that they're not in a hot space anymore, and how to transition or make sure that they capture the share of the revenue they deserve. And I've been in the security space for 30 plus years, started at the National Security Agency. So I like to say I'm one of the few analysts that speak crypto. So working with Zetaset and Tim in this area is, what I really enjoy doing and getting involved in.
Well, Charles, I'm really glad you didn't have to break any bad news to me. So thank you for that.
No, you're in one of those moving areas, not ones that you have to capture share to continue surviving.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, it's great you positioned it that way too, Charles and Tim, because we have been working together. Zetaset commissioned Accelerated Strategies Group to do some research around Kubernetes and containers, primarily around data protection, data security of data within Kubernetes and containers. There's a lot of course, you can't pick up any IT journal, blog, whatever, without reading something about containers. It's all the rage. It's been in all the papers, as they say. But with like any new technology, we often apply what we know to it, and sometimes that's a good approach, and sometimes you've got to evolve or significantly evolve your approach when it comes to security. So let's first start by, and we've launched this report. It's called Kubernetes Data Protection Report. It's available on the Accelerated Strategies Group site. I'll share the URL with you in just a moment. Charles was the lead analyst on this work. Charles, tell us a little bit about what the research was about. What were we trying to learn with this research?
There was kind of three things we were trying to get a handle on. And the first, of course, is trying to figure out, is Kubernetes being used in production? Is it moving forward, or is it kind of being held back and potentially being held back by security? So that was the first question. The second one is, how do they feel about Kubernetes security, especially with their deployments, and where they think they are going? Are they comfortable? Do they want something else? And then that last part was, what do they see? So even forward looking to get an idea of what they need to do to improve the situation. So those were kind of the three things that we were looking at. Is it being used? Is it being used in production? What is their overall feeling about security, and what needs to be done to move forward? And as you mentioned, the focus was on data security as much as the overall aspect of security, because as you know, there's many aspects, and for this area, because of data movement and other things, we really were curious about what is their data protection plan.
And we were talking about data in many forms, right? It can be data within the containers, could be databases within containers, kind of full encapsulation of data sources, not just data within the app as well. Tim, I know this is a center in the space of where you are in. Tell us a little bit about Zetaset and your whole strategy around data protection, data security. That's kind of a big question for the short of a conversation, but if you can.
Well, I think if you just take the world and say there's the legacy and there's this new DevOps world, I think one is the evolution out of all the deficiencies and how to make a better cost efficiencies out of an IT infrastructure that's existing, or why build out if you can leverage what you have more? And I think that was the theme of VMs 20 years ago. And this is just another evolution of that to containers and orchestration with Kubernetes. And in all cases, data needs to be protected. So we at Zetaset believe if we can give you encryption and give you that last line of defense that complements access controls, runtime, and audit monitoring, we give you a full comprehensive. So just know that, encryption isn't the end all be all, but it is definitely one of the main legs of the data protection stool. So we'll focus on that one, but don't think I'm just centric on that. I understand the full security solution. So for adoption in encryption, we feel, how do we get people to protect data with encryption? And the big things are, we'll make it flexible, make it easy to use. And I think the biggest one is performance. If you see a lot of, I think it's even in one of the stats that we have in the survey, that performance is one of the bigger issues with implementing encryption. Take that off the table. And we at Zetaset say, if we can make encryption so simple, it's transparent, you don't even know it's there, why not do it everywhere? Why stop in one section of data and not do in the other? I think the iPhone's a great example of that. It's encrypted. Everybody knows it only because it's in the headlines, but it's always been there. It's behind the scenes. We kind of use Zetaset as being that pervasive encryption behind the scenes, whether it's legacy or this DevOps world with Kubernetes.
Excellent. Now, Charles, we pretty clearly answered, I think really clearly answered the question. Of course, people are using Kubernetes in production, but they had concerns around, some felt they were secure and some weren't quite as comfortable with how secure they felt. What were some of the data around that?
Yeah, so that was interesting in terms of we just asked them pretty much just as you had said, brought out, how do they feel the security is being effective, and we were looking at a lot of data protection, as you say, but almost 50% felt that they were comfortable to a certain extent, with their security as they were moving forward. So that was kind of, as an analyst, you kind of want to dig in deeper and say, okay, if that's the case, then some of these other answers should be a lot different than they were. And the interesting aspect of this was that half felt that they were doing okay, and half really had some concerns. But then when you ask them, overall, what is the vulnerability attack surfaces for Kubernetes deployments, and you kind of get a different feel, a different perspective, right? So, if things were going good, you wouldn't expect that. As it turned out, almost half of the respondents said that we had 5 different attack surfaces as potential areas of concern, and nearly half of the people said that all the attack surfaces were of concern. Mm-hmm. So I kind of start thinking, wow, half the people think the security is working okay, but then you get half the people think that there's multiple attack surfaces that are vulnerable. So either all of those people have those same thoughts, or people have more concern about their security than they want to let on. And I think that that happens with security in a lot of areas, right? Where if you just ask the question of, are you secure? And they're going to say, yeah, because one, they maybe don't want to think that they're not. But two, it's, there's nothing bad has happened yet.
Yes.
But then when you start digging into it, it's like, oh, and, you kind of ask them questions, and it's like, oh, well, now that you mention it, maybe, because there's vulnerabilities in the core platform, or that the containers have vulnerabilities, or there's access control issues, as you mentioned, or network management issues, that maybe things aren't as
in a way, just to draw an analogy, if your surgeon said, well, 50% of the time my surgeries are successful, but I don't know about the other half. That might be a little concerning to you, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but
do you remember when what was it, Donald Rumsfeld, when in the Persian Gulf briefings with his famous line was, "We don't know what we don't know."
Right. Unknown unknowns, right?
This is exactly what we have here. I think there's an educational issue where maybe people just say, well, my security was working for me in the traditional, so same thing. We can just translate it over to this new world, and it's fine. And to me, that we still have a legacy business that's pretty substantial. And I'll give you one example: healthcare. We put that, and they say, oh yeah, you're right. We could get hacked there, and we have no encryption around. So whether it's old or new, you have it. I think there's history to look at here. Did VMs get rolled out and there were security issues? Did they not even think of them, but slowly but surely they were hacked, there were breaches, there were all of these things. And I think we need to pay attention to that and point to it and say, look, this happened already, learn from it, because we're now in a new world order where it's even more dispersed, and if you had 5 VMs on one server, now think about 1,000 containers across an entire network and environment. I mean, that the multiplicity of potential, like we just said, for attack vectors is massive. So we don't know what we don't know. And I think these folks need to be a little bit more educated on security to say, oh, I get it. So it's a two-parter. Did you have a complete security solution, for one? And two, do you understand Kubernetes and how the two fit together? And is this in your mind stopping you from going to the next step? And I think there's a bunch of nervous people out there that don't even know the potential exposures they have.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it coming. And I don't say that just because I'm in the industry hoping to, excel with my revenue. I just see that there will be an issue with Kubernetes and containers getting hacked. A bad actor gets in, they mine all the data, and before you know it, there's 2 petabytes of somebody's personal data. Some enterprise is out there for the world to see. That will happen. If it happens next year or the year after, it's going to be there.
Yeah, you make some great points there, Tim, and primarily, as you mentioned, the one is like when VMs came out, the attackers didn't, the attackers just can't show up and start attacking it, right? They need to play with it and kick the tires and find those vulnerabilities and find those processes. And then, so, when you first roll out things, it looks pretty good. There's no, there's no sharks here right now, right? The water's clear. And then they figure out where to go. And the interesting in the survey, it's not so much a technology issue. And I think you kind of alluded to this. About 60% said that what they need, the greatest factor, the greatest improvement is better policies, better procedures. And I think that's where, where they're beginning to start thinking about, wow, I now need to do something different because I am doing something different, right? So that was another really interesting part for me, is that the level of people needing more education and more policies and procedures to help improve their security. So they're not looking at just as technology, but at that level. So
yeah, I think there's some great opportunities in there for the global services practice to help bundle and give that education. Because I don't think we're going to turn away from the benefits of containers or Kubernetes. If I could use the Hadoop as the analogy, Hadoop had all the rave in the world, big data, unstructured data. Did it really come to pass? No. Are we in a hype cycle with Kubernetes? I don't think so. I think this is the next evolution of IT infrastructure. It's not going away. And if you take that point of view, you've got to make sure we've got a comprehensive package to give them. And look at all the new startups that have gotten into container encryption. Everyone sees the exposure that's there, and we're riding that wave with it. But our wave is easier to translate because we can say, hey, look, you needed it back in the old way. We got it over here for you. We'll work together. I did notice, that with the cloud, I think a lot of folks will continue to rely on that because they don't have the expertise. It makes all the sense in the world. Hey, leverage a cloud provider, leverage their Kubernetes distribution, and that's good. The other half, they're either maybe savvy enough or kicking the tires and saying, hey, I'll be DIY with Kubernetes, or maybe I'll do Red Hat OpenShift or VMware Tanzu, since they've got an enterprise version that has a foot on-prem and a foot in the cloud. So you kind of have I look at it like you have a 3-parter. Somebody's just on-prem, somebody's hybrid, and somebody's leaning cloud. And I don't know if it's a third, to be honest. I mean, within that third, totally cloud, there could be more people who are hybrid that do both. Whatever you want to take from that is it's dispersed how people are going to deploy Kubernetes. And
there was also really good data showing, there's multiple providers of that Kubernetes distribution. So even within one organization, you might try to standardize on something, but more than likely you're going to, in a VMware world, you'll use one thing, whatever it might be. You're going to be looking at multiple stacks that you're trying to secure, as well as the application architecture. So complexity has gone way, way up. And I think that's part of what's concerning security people.
So there's something you just made me think of on the environments and using what the data that's in a Kubernetes environment can be in multiple things. Like Mitch, you said, it could be like the actual database where the data is containerized. Well, cloud, that's more container native storage, as it's called. Then there's the cloud native storage where it might be in some shared storage, like a vSAN, vSphere volume, or you can look at block storage, or you can look at Ceph, which is Red Hat. Well, all of those guys, and I like this comparison because it does a really good one. You have the beach, call those self-encrypting drives. You have a garbage can, call that like a vSphere's encryption protection. Then you have a bucket. And then after that, that's, I think where we more play in the partition volume. And then the very biggest one is grains of sand. So the Goldilocks principle is where do you put security without impacting performance and the efficiencies that Kubernetes brings us? We've done all the analysis on that, and my team has been around encryption for 20 plus years, and they said the bucket, because it gives you enough to protect without killing you. Because imagine a key for every grain of sand. That's the performance would be destroyed, and that was the top concern or two with the issues of security and encryption, and that's how you solve that. And if you're able to do it, and I saw the other one was more of integration with the platform and causing problems. If you can integrate, I think you've solved the two major hurdles. And if it is truly a big issue for going to production, I think we've taken it off the table and all the way back around. If you encrypt everything, you need to do it without impacting performance and just transparent, do it, deploy. So I think it's properly positioned for encryption to take a greater role as this data gets more dispersed. And I think we have an opportunity to really protect all of that wherever it goes.
It's interesting too. There was some really good data that showed that, naturally folks rely on what they know, right? Using traditional data encryption tools, using role-based access control, things that we know, but also there's a recognition of not sure that traditional data security encryption technology was sufficient, that there more is needed. Maybe some thoughts you might have, Tim, about that, because I know you talk a lot with customers about traditional tools. What do we need something new, filling out that software stack more completely?
I think here's a great example that's different from what's happened in the past. And I don't mean to get too techy, but I will. If a developer tells a container there's an app in it and says, I need access to this data, the way the process works is Kubernetes then says, okay, I need a persistent volume claim for this container to go talk to a persistent volume. The persistent volume is just something that sucks data that ultimately will be used by the container. What people don't realize is once that container is done with that persistent volume doesn't go away. It sits there. It's back to the bucket. It's just a bucket that's on the beach and the kid left it there and walked away. You can have 1,000 buckets out there. So that data is still all out there. It doesn't go away. And I don't think people realize that well enough that, well, what do you do? How do you protect it? Well, somebody could get access to it, but yeah, sure. It's going to be easy to grab. What if it's encrypted? They can't do anything with it. So one way to what we call is deactivate data's availability is if it's encrypted, you just chuck the key. It's gone forever. You'll never get access to it. That whole process is brand new. They didn't have that in infrastructure. You didn't create something like this that forever just floats around. That's where Kubernetes and these persistent volumes are brand new and different. And pointing that out to people, I think a lot of people don't realize that. The data becomes, you get the value of data, you put it up in the container, they do some processing, it comes back down. Gold. You've read and write, and it's got all the conclusions you want, and then you throw it over there, but it just doesn't get thrown out. It's still hanging out there. Different world we live in now, and to be able to protect that, I think that's a great differentiator.
Excellent. Yeah. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I was going to say, the survey did show, those same things. The real issue is the tools aren't well integrated with Kubernetes right now, or really, it turned out to be. The traditional databases that are going to be encrypted aren't well integrated with the containers. And the last one is, performance is going to be taking a hit if it's not optimized for this deployment. Yeah. So all of those came up as very huge issues and challenges for working with the data encryption in Kubernetes.
I'll give you the high level one that is simply the legacy infrastructure is bottoms up. Okay, so we all know that containers and Kubernetes has evolved out of virtualization and it's floating up here. Well, are you going to use a bottoms up to protect that, or should you use a top down, which is in concert to the integration that pulls security, that pulls data from the top as you need it? Well, it's a no-brainer. If security needs to keep track or pace with everything that's happened with infrastructure. If infrastructure continues to evolve to these greater technologies and efficiencies, security shouldn't stay the same. It's got to keep pace with them and become integrated with that. And if anything, look at legacy, if security wasn't integrated and people learned as they went, oh, we need to secure this, or we need to secure this, we'll take what you learned there and say, oh, we got to do something, whatever that was here, we got to do it with Kubernetes. And I think this is the opportunity for DevSecOps to really walk out with DevOps and get it right this time. It's not going to be perfect, but they'll get it better.
One of the things I wanted to just kind of wrap up in conclusion, curious on your thoughts, Tim. I mean, you worked with Accelerated Strategies, you commissioned us to do this report, but it's not a marketing piece. It's a completely independent research. What were some of the things you found most valuable or interesting, or maybe didn't expect from the research done kind of outside of your group? Because sometimes we live in our own bubbles, right, of our own organizations, and I call it breathing our own exhaust. I do that, I know. So I'm just curious what you found most compelling about this.
I was actually very excited to see a third of the folks putting this multiple applications in production. I think I thought it was earlier than it is. And that tells me right there that this isn't going away. This turbine is gaining steam. It's coming more. Because I think we've all been there where we're like, hey, it's great. It's, the hype is there. I think we're there. And I think you're going to see this really start to pass another barrier as we go into 2021, because in a remote world that we unfortunately live in may at some point still look like that for a while. And going forward, there's still going to be, I think, more remote. And I think we would all agree with that. Mm-hmm. So if you've got that, Kubernetes containers will live in that world. And I think you're really going to see the adoption continue. So that was the big one I took away, was that it's not as early as I thought.
Mm-hmm. Real interesting. Well, great. Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with you. For our listeners, our viewers, please check it out. You can go to the Accelerated Strategy site. It's accelst.com. There's a what's new section. You scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see the report right there to download it. Tim, how about to find out more about Zetaset?
You can go to zetaset.com. It's sound like it sounds, ZETTASET.com. And we have a wealth of information about DevOps and legacy that really give you good education and show you everything we've got around encryption. I'd just like to say, both of you, Mitch, Charles, thank you. ASG has been great to work with and very insightful. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate the opportunity. And, I'll conclude a link, point folks to a recent webinar that we just did about a week or so ago, talking about the subject kind of pre the report being released, where we had a chance to explore some of these topics and thoughts more. So please check that out in an on-demand way where I think it's well worth it. We had really good attendance and great questions. So, well, gentlemen, it's been a lot of fun talking with this, and who knew encryption could be so fun? But
it's always fun, Mitch.
I knew you would say that. Okay, have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Guys, take care.
All right, bye.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I'm joined by Akshay Anand, who's product ambassador with Exelos, and David Crouch, who's a senior advisor at Beyond 20. Welcome. Good to have you on. Good to be talking with you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. Would you both start out? Let's do a little bit of introduction, just to introduce yourself, a little bit of what you do, and a little bit about the company that you're with. If you want to start, Akshay.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having us, as I said. My name is Akshay Anand. I am the product ambassador for ITIL, working for Axelos Global Best Practice. Axelos was a company that was formed about 5 years ago as a partnership between Her Majesty's government and a large public sector, a large private sector company called Capita. We like to think of ourselves as the custodians of the best practice bodies of knowledge, not just ITIL. We also manage Prince2, which is around project management, MSP, which is all managing successful programs, which is around program management, and a few others besides. Before joining Axelos, I was a consultant for most of my career in the IT service management space across both the US and the UK. I spent a couple of years as the head of service management for Macmillan Publishing as well. And that's me.
Great. David?
Hi, my name is David Crouch, affectionately called Lord Baltimore at the office because that's where I live and where I'm coming to you from right now. Doesn't come with a crown. I spent about 20 years at Johns Hopkins University and Hospital before coming to Beyond 20. Finished my time there working in the IT Solutions Center, which was our service management center for excellence. At Beyond 20, we are a company that focuses on digital transformation. At the core of it, we really try to improve the way people and organizations work by looking at their digital transformations and looking at how to improve their IT service management processes. We do consulting work, we do training and focusing on ITIL, but also project management and Agile and DevOps and these other areas as well. And we also have a team of folks who implement IT service management tools.
Excellent. Good. Perfect timing for our topic today. So let's kind of jump into that. We're talking about Agile and DevOps and ways that that's introduced into companies, best practices, learnings from adopting or not those different practices. Maybe we can start with how we introduce, or you've seen companies introduced either Agile or DevOps or both into organizations, and you're kind of thinking probably a little bit larger organizations where there's more change management involved. I imagine that's a lot of work you get into, David. Is that correct?
It is. We see a lot of organizations who know a little bit about DevOps and a little bit about Agile, but haven't really adopted an Agile mindset and don't really have the full understanding of what organizational structure can really support DevOps. And yet they need these things to really support a digital transformation. So typically we'll start with doing some sort of assessment to see where they are now, to see what pain points they have right now, and then try to figure out, okay, does it make sense to introduce Agile? Where does it make sense to introduce DevOps? And how quickly can that be done, or how gradually do we need to introduce these concepts?
Mm-hmm. How about you, Akshay? I'm sure you've worked with plenty of organizations that have introduced this and gone through that process.
Yeah, I've actually seen broadly two major patterns. The first being where the organization transformation is driven from top down. So it's usually the board of directors or whatever governance structure says, look, this is the vision of what we want the company to be. And the senior most leadership team says, well, in order to be able to do that, we need to be able to iterate faster. We need to be able to have much more of a focus on pushing out digital products and services. And that change then percolates through the rest of the organization. So very much a top-down thing. The other major pattern that I've seen and experienced is where you might have a small team who, with the help of let's just say a more enlightened manager, is given the freedom to start to experiment and innovate and change ways of working, whilst at the same time remaining compliant with the rest of the organization's policies and what have you. And they're able to demonstrate improvements in either efficiency, productivity, experience, whatever it might be, to the point where the rest of the organization says, okay, so what are these guys doing and what can we learn from that? And how can we start to pick up some of those changes ourselves? So in a way, at that point, there are sort of, it's a branch that sort of new ways of working or new principles of working start to diffuse horizontally. So there are other sort of teams, engineering teams, operational teams, etc., who start to think and work in those ways. Or it could be that the stories of that change percolate upwards, where the middle management or the senior management say, this is interesting. Are other organizations doing something like this? Would it benefit us to roll this out a bit wider and give it the sort of support and evangelism and investment that we need in order to create a larger change? So that's the sort of branch I've seen, but broadly it's two patterns: top down, bottom up.
I think one of the biggest challenges with introducing any kind of fundamental change like Agile or DevOps is sort of crossing that chasm between saying we're doing it and kind of really truly embracing the spirit or the concepts or the culture of it. Have you found that to be true?
Well, yes, there's a difference. The way I reconcile this difference perhaps is in the following way, and David probably has a completely different experience from his vantage point, but for me, one of the biggest challenges that organizations face, or at least let's say practitioners face, and then I'll come to organization. One of the things that I think practitioners are challenged by is, in a way, thinking that everybody understands things and just gets it. Everyone understands why we have to be agile. Everyone understands why DevOps is important. And the truth of the matter is, not a lot of people understand that. And even if they do understand the words, they don't necessarily understand the implications to the rest of the organization. So there is a little bit of this need to manage upwards, need to manage outwards, to be able to champion the need for that change, the need for these new ways of working. The other thing which I think organizations and practitioners are challenged by is understanding where these new ways of working will succeed and where they would not succeed. And this is some of the things that we do actually talk about within the sort of ITIL 4 library of guidance, that digital transformation or these new ways of working are really important, yes, but in certain contexts, they can be a hindrance rather than a boon. And organizations need to understand where these sorts of things can work. If the work that's being done is highly predictable or has very long cycles of work and feedback, then perhaps trying to break it down might only go so far. But if you try to over-engineer that or impose an agile way of working, you might actually end up doing more harm than good, even though you're starting out with good intentions. To put it bluntly, don't care how the work is being done. Once you start reaching the level of governance or supplier management or whatever it might be, in a way, yes, the CIOs today might say DevOps is really important, Agile is really important, etc. But if you press them about what exactly is being done, look, I just say, based on my conversations with other leaders, I understand this is important, but the exact mechanics of how we're actually going to execute on this, I leave to the team who's actually doing the work. So you've got to understand that, change is difficult. The further up you go in an organization, the harder it is going to be to try to convince somebody about the nitty-gritties that need to change. And you've got to be able to understand your audience, understand what they need to hear, understand how to convince them. And that aspect of communication is one of the critical components of organizational change management. It's one of the places where I see the failure of organizational change management most commonly occur.
Interesting. How about you, David? Share some of your experiences.
I think some of the more challenging, but also more interesting, from the consultant point of view, situations are dealing with some companies that have been around for 80, 100, 150 years. And I think folks pretty much around the globe would know some of these companies, and they're very mature in some respects. They've built their brand over time. But then when they start to suddenly, some of them suddenly wake up and realize, oh, wait a second, we have gotten out of touch with what our customers really need, our external customers really need and what they want. And there are competitors that we never even dreamed of before that are entering into our space. They suddenly wake up and realize not only do we need new products and new services, but we also need to work in a different way to produce those, because customers change their mind a lot. Customers are fickle, and I don't mean that in a bad way. We want to understand what our customers need. And then the challenge becomes, okay, well, if we haven't been doing this right now, it's necessary, but not sufficient just to provide training in these areas. Training goes so far, that's very useful, but then also, where are we going to have an area where doing something like agile software development really makes sense. I worked with an organization where any of what are often referred to as systems of record. So these are internal systems that keep the company running. Their software team was actually doing a fairly good job because they worked in a relatively agile way. It wasn't 100% of what you would describe as agile, but it was pretty darn good. And yet they would often run into roadblocks when they got into the more, for lack of a better term, traditional change management, or as we call it these days, change engagement processes, where, they were actually analyzing risk and managing risk all throughout the process because they were doing an agile approach. And yet sometimes they would have this long delay at the end of the process when they got to their change control board in that company. On the other hand, that company almost overnight experienced some significant financial losses and significant layoffs, and they very quickly needed to develop some what we call systems of engagement, systems and tools that their third-party paying customers would use and would purchase. And in that case, the organization bypassed their internal IT entirely and just went to a third party because the third party really was already doing some version of DevOps in that case for years. So then the question becomes, does their existing IT shop still have a reason to be? The answer in that case was yes, but it becomes very difficult because if you tried to apply that to the entire organization, particularly overnight, I don't think it would have worked very well.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes in those situations, you also see people peel out sort of a skunk work project if it is an internal group, just to try to isolate and minimize the overall organizational reaction. Some people call them the corporate antibodies that tend to kick out and respond to change.
It's interesting to say that, Mitch. But what I've also seen though is that that is also it can also work, but it has to be done very carefully because who was it? Which book was it? I think Jeffrey Moore. Was it Jeffrey Moore? Yeah, I think Jeffrey Moore wrote an entire book about this phenomenon. A book called Zone to Win. And what he was talking in that book with numerous examples, which I'm sure we've all experienced, is that Skunkworks, that innovation lab, does really well as the innovation lab. Mm-hmm. But the moment the organization says, okay, how do we now scale this new innovative feature, this new innovative product, and industrialize it to the point where we can offer it to our thousands, millions of customers, that's when it falls down. Mm-hmm. Because you're changing the constraints within which a product exists, if you will. It no longer exists as a small experiment measured in terms of success as an experiment. It's now got to be able to stand up to the measures of being like this industrialized product or service. So if you're moving the yardsticks, is your product capable of actually bridging that, moving across? I don't want to use the word bridging the chasm. Is your product actually capable of moving across into that industrialized state? And what we've also seen through some of the research that went into ITIL 4 as well is a lot of organizations fail to make that bridge between that innovation lab and the industrialized operation.
I appreciate you sharing that too. It could happen very well to the external group that gets formed as well. How do you reintegrate that, repatriate it back into the organization?
And there's a Harvard professor that famously kind of describes some digital transformation experiments as kind of like attaching a speedboat to an aircraft carrier. They move at different speeds, and although the speedboat may go really fast, try to get that to translate into the aircraft carrier. It's probably not going to happen. So it becomes, the challenge is, do we do a proof of concept, which sounds like an experiment to me, but if we do that, can we really translate that into larger organizational success? And hard to say, to come up with a definitive answer, but for larger organizations, I think that what I've seen is that, it's been very difficult for them to do that successfully. Mm-hmm. So they have to find other ways of doing it.
There's a lot of things you can look at. You can look at sort of historical, what's worked, what's failed in the past. You can look at, I call it the flow. What is the momentum of the organization? Are we metrics? Are we finance? Are we what are decisions driven by? One of the things that can also help with that is also alignment, right? It's why are you introducing Agile? Why other than this being an IT fad, which it's not just that, but it could be just for that reason. Usually it's not a great reason to introduce it. You've got to have some real true business drivers that, like your example, Akshay, of, hey, we've got to respond to these things in market, right? The customer's expectation has changed. That creates a sense of urgency, but also purpose. Like what are we trying to do differently and why? And then how do we apply this?
There's an additional wrinkle or complication, if you will, for publicly listed companies as well, where they've got to report certain metrics. And if you look at any company's quarterly filings or annual filings where they talk about the year ahead or the quarter ahead, they are using certain types of metrics to communicate their direction and their results to their shareholders, to the market. And you might say that, look, these measures are no longer relevant for what we're trying to do or for where we're trying to go. But then what does that do to the company's confidence in as a shareholder? The example I cite is when the New York Times tried to move to the digital subscription. You can't translate print subscribers into digital subscribers or engagement. How do you measure the success of the digital engagement? Because you're not delivering hard copy newspapers anymore. But the investors were used to seeing those sort of subscriber counts and subscriber churn and all these sorts of things as forward-looking guidance. So there's an additional complication from a governance and a reporting mechanism, especially if you're a publicly listed company. And that's why people like David have so much fun going into these companies, trying to help them figure out, well, it's not just about changing the ways we're working. How do we educate our peers? How do we educate our managers? How do we educate our suppliers? How do we educate our consumers? How do we educate our shareholders? There's all these different stakeholders. It's not just about changing the way software development is done. It has massive ripple effects across the ecosystem.
Well, and what's really interesting about, like New York Times is that they were still successful with their print publication, one of the few, when they began their digital transformation. So you have a tremendous amount of courage to be able to say as the leader, you know what, we're successful now, but this is not going to last. We could see it in the marketplace. So what we actually need to do is intentionally set up a parallel operating model and say, we're going to move in this new direction. And that means that's, in their case, going to intentionally siphon away over time the way we do business now. And it's probably going to hurt in the meantime. And we'll use any of the profits from our existing model to move over to this new model. But gosh, if you're an investor, you have to be pretty nervous about that unless you're really in it for the long term. And you say, you know what, they've seen this and other companies have tried this. How do I know that New York Times is going to be successful when some of their peer publications have not been when they try to do this? And for a variety of factors, it seemed to work for them, but that's pretty daunting.
That's what I would call the disrupt yourself before you're disrupted model, right? Because usually it's much more painful when you're reacting to someone else who's come in and taken market share or whatever. That's a really good example too of, in the print media going into digital, it's not the same product. It's not the same consumers. It's not the same behavior. The market really has changed, or maybe you're just really going after a different market who would never now buy print, but they would just use that example. So a lot of it can be driven by those things that we've answered about, or strategy or understanding of the market or shifts that are occurring, and tie those reasons as part of why we need to create software faster, or why we need to create it in ways that's in smaller increments to be able to respond to really rapid shifts or experiment in market. That's another great reason to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, talk a little bit about, you mentioned the speedboat. I can just imagine it tied to the aircraft carrier, kind of sort of like the fly tied to the string, right? How do you start to introduce speed into a larger organization that has a lot of momentum around the way they've been doing things? It's worked for them, probably very successful. How do you start introducing something like speed to say this is super critical and here's how we've got to operate now?
I think it starts with trying to understand what they're primarily trying to do. Where does having more speed make the most sense, right? So it could be we're in a consumer marketplace and the customers are changing their minds a lot, and there may be a way to develop something more quickly to respond to that need, or in the perfect world to actually kind of predict and shape that demand, for the great digital masters. On the other hand, some companies may say, well, maybe we're not in a strictly business to consumer marketplace, but we need to increase some operational efficiencies in some areas. And so maybe speed is more important there. And then, for a few companies out there, it may be both, right? It may be if we increase operational efficiencies on the inside of the company, we can also drive the outside third-party customer, and that's no easy way to do that, to figure out where speed is going to be appropriate and where doing things quicker, might actually get in the way in some cases. Actually, I don't know what your experiences have been there.
I mean, look, there's a lot of great organizational change, organizational design literature out there for people who want to read up more about this sort of thing. The SATA change model, or Kotter's 7 steps, or whatever else it might be. In my experience, one of the first steps I've seen in any successful change is, to use Kotter's language, creating a sense of urgency. I guess this is something I remember from my time living in the US. Wasn't there this sort of tagline that the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem, or something along those lines, right? So it's kind of like that. The first step towards creating a change is to acknowledge that you need to change. Because once everyone acknowledges that you need to change, you can start to think about, well, what sort of change do we want to have? And this has to be a highly collaborative effort. It's not just your CXOs locking themselves in a resort, conference room resort, at a resort for 2 days and whiteboarding this out. This has to be a truly collaborative exercise across the entire organization. There may need to be some constraints set in place. And what I've typically seen is a board of directors might say, look, this is where we want to be 5 years from now. Not necessarily saying how that needs to be achieved, but saying this is where we want to be. And that, in combination with creating that sense of urgency, says, look, if we need to hit this sort of a target, we need to be able to develop software faster, or close out outages quicker, or have a more agile procurement process, or whatever else it might be. And that's when you start to identify the sort of strategic and tactical initiatives. Because you're working collaboratively, you're dispersing that cognitive effort, if you will. So it's not just somebody from one particular vantage point saying, I think as a CFO, I think we are, giving away too much money, so we're going to be cost cutting only. That's a singular perspective. But once you distribute perspective, you can then say, right, if we are supposed to meet this, we have to change here, we have to change there, we have to modify that, and so on. And for me, that is the essential first 2 steps. Create that sense of urgency, and then distribute the cognition of what needs to change. Create that collaborative series of committees, councils, call it what you will, that will help you identify in different areas what needs to change. And then you start investing to execute on that, the series of tactical initiatives or programs of change.
When I first learned about change management, David, maybe you can comment on this. We use the phrase the burning platform. What's the burning platform that we're on that's forcing us to change, or really compelling us to make a change? And it can be as little as, as dangerous as are we going to exist, but also could be, here's why a 2 or 3 year strategy makes sense. Let's not just communicate the strategy. Let's communicate the why. Like, what's changing? What evidence do we have of this? What do we want to get ahead of, or prevent ourselves from experiencing? Have you seen that as a successful strategy for helping create that burning platform, or at least the sense of it?
I think so. I mean, I think the top level support from the leadership is absolutely critical. But when it comes to defining the problem, getting down to as specific as you possibly can. It's not just a matter of, we're not getting new products out to customers quickly enough, or it's not just a matter of we're not implementing enough infrastructure changes within a certain period of time. It's a matter of exactly what about that isn't going well, and why would improving that be made better? In some cases, it's obvious. In some cases, for example, it's not so obvious. And when people think of Agile and DevOps, one of the first things that comes to mind is speed. We're going to get more speed. That's an important part of it. It's not the only reason why you might use some of those techniques. So, if I have to be at the to use a simple example, if I need to be at the theater for a show, not these days, but if I have to be there at 7 p.m. and I only live 15 minutes away, and driving faster won't necessarily improve my results. I get there. It still doesn't start until 7 p.m. If I get there at 6 p.m., I guess I get a good parking spot. So speed is just one element, but think about with Agile, doing things in smaller iterations, controlling the risk, controlling the scope. All of these are considerations, in addition to just speed.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think the research shows us, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go right ahead, actually.
I was going to say, one of the other things that our research has shown us as we've been working on ITIL 4 and other bits and pieces, even frameworks like managing successful programs and so on, is organizations need to figure out the right duration of their strategy cycle. Now, if your company is a two-person company, maybe your strategy cycle is measured in days or weeks. All the way up to if you're the government of India and you're trying to manage the activity, not manage, but govern 1 point how many ever billion people, then your strategy cycle is likely to be measured in years, if not decades. Well, hopefully not decades, but so I think the other aspect that we've seen is, at least in typical organizations, strategy cycles have gone from being sort of this thing that happened every 5 years to maybe things that are happening every 3 years, because the world's changing too fast for a 5-year cycle to make sense. We may see a point where 3-year cycles are deemed insufficient and we need to move to 2 years or 1 year cycles. But that's the other trend that we're also seeing, that strategy cycles themselves are reducing.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that a lot with managed service providers. For some of the managed service providers, even 1 year seems to be an awfully long time for some of them. So there's this kind of blend between, are we talking about strategy or tactics here? But I agree. The timeline is becoming shorter and shorter, it seems.
It certainly has, and of course, our current COVID situation. I've seen some resources. I know some of the sources of this, but some have said we've accelerated as much as 6 years in our digital transformation strategies in the last 6 months. Probably not everybody has, I imagine. Well, this has been great talking with you both. I know you mentioned Akshay Jeffrey Moore's book, Zone to Win, as a great resource. Any other resources on introducing Agile and DevOps or on change management that you guys can think of, might suggest?
Well, I think I'd be very remiss if I didn't actually mention ITIL 4, which is the product for which I am an ambassador.
That was a setup question.
Leading question there. No, so look, there are a couple of really good books in ITIL 4 which talk about this. 2 books in particular that I'd like to highlight. The first is High Velocity IT, and the second is Digital and IT Strategy. Digital and IT Strategy actually does refer back to some of the content in High Velocity IT. High Velocity IT is more focused on the tactics and operations aspect of introducing these new ways of working and managing the changes and the implications therein to the rest of the organization. Digital IT Strategy is more about the tactics and the governance and strategy and the interface to tactics. So it's about how do you determine what's the appropriate business model? How do you create a change in your business model? And from that, create a change in your operating model. From that, figure out where Agile and DevOps makes sense and where it doesn't make sense, and so on. So it's very much the sort of top-down, but the leader's perspective of things, whereas High Velocity IT is the practitioner's perspective of things. So I think those 2 are definitely really good. I'd also plug a couple of books like A Team of Teams, I think is really an interesting read about talking about how, especially in an organization like the US Army, which you would typically think is very large, inflexible, and so on, how they were able to create that kind of a change, not necessarily with software development, but around ways of working from across multiple teams, across multiple time zones. So that's also a really good book to check out.
Yeah, I've not read that book, but I've heard it's good. I think it's by Stanley McChrystal, right? General McChrystal.
That's right.
Great author. So I think he uses his whole military experience as examples of that. So I've heard him speak about it. How about you, David? Any suggestions? Resources?
I would just say that, as one of the authors of the ITIL Digital and IT Strategy book, I'm going to put in a plug for that. I'm just a little bit biased, even though it probably took several years off of my lifespan to help write that. I'm kidding, but no, that's that's really talking more about the strategy side of things. But I recall reading an article years ago as part of one of his classic books. Michael Porter talked about IT is not strategic. And I struggle with that. I agreed kind of at the time, and now I don't know. And I think if IT is now strategic in this era of digital transformation, it really comes down to things like high velocity IT, to DevOps, to Agile, to some of the techniques that we talk about in the Digital and IT Strategy book and in HVIT. So, I would suggest reading that.
There's probably a couple of other plugs to make just before we wrap up. Sorry. For those who want to read a little bit deeper into some of the more cutting edge, I would say, thought leaders, read up on Simon Wardley, Wardley mapping and his whole strategy cycle stuff. He publishes that on his blog. There's tons and tons of material on his blog, which I think he's trying to condense into a series of Medium articles. But there's also YouTube talks that he does, amazing stuff. And the second is Dave Snowden and the Kinevin framework. It's getting a lot of attention in the Agile space, especially, but it's a decision-making framework. It's a sense-making and a decision-making framework. And it has applications from business strategy to project management and everything in between. And I think that's another, at the moment, cutting edge, but hopefully soon mass market approach.
Well, those are some fantastic resources. Maybe parting thought for all of us is, I don't know if IT is strategic, but I'm pretty sure software is strategic these days. That's really fueling our digital transformation. So topic for another conversation. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Akshay Anand, who's product ambassador for Axelos, and David Crouch, senior advisor, Beyond 20. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts on this topic. I'm sure it's been really helpful.
Thanks for having us. And to the audience, you can find me on Twitter at Blowboy if you care to follow me. And I'd love to hear some feedback, either through Mitch or directly, however you'd like. I'd love to know what you thought about what we were talking about today.
Wonderful. Happy to do that. And I'll pass that along if we do. David, you want to share any contact information?
Yeah, same here. I'm on LinkedIn. A slightly younger, bow-tied version of myself is on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. And certainly visit our blog at Beyond 20, where we're always, writing articles, trying to grapple with some of these issues, changing our minds some of the time, but you find a lot of what I write there.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to talking with you both again soon. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you.
that's going to call a wrap on Thursday's show. We hope you've enjoyed it. Just chock full of great information today, by the way. I'm really happy with yesterday. If you missed Tuesday's show, it was great too. They're all great. But anyway, we are going to call a wrap on this Thursday. Tomorrow we will be showing best of, not fresh content, but we'll be back Monday with more fresh content on TechStrong TV. Folks, be careful out there. The virus is running rampant. Hospitals are filling up. Stay in if you can. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands. Don't be stupid. If we could just see it through another couple of months, we'll be through this thing, I hope. Be well, be safe, be strong. TechStrong. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.